D. Mace Finken and Donick 1025, 1063 The Game. Broadcasting from the Busy Bee Plumbing, Heating, and Air Conditioning Game Nashville studios, home of the $99 yearly Beehive membership, where the buzz is always about great service. And we are presented by Bet365. Whatever the moment, it's never ordinary at Bet365. Willie Donick, Derek Mason, Adam Vingan, and David Janes here with you. A lot to discuss today. Between his pre-draft news conference and interview with Jared Stillman, Barry Trotz spoke for roughly an hour yesterday. So we have a lot to sift through there, and we will do that throughout the program. Scott Wheeler, the Athletics NHL draft analyst, will join us in about 20 minutes to preview the first round of the NHL draft, which is on Friday. We'll have Jonathan Hutton on at noon. We have a lot to discuss, but gentlemen, if you will indulge me for just a few minutes.
Indulge.
And I have warned Willie and Derek and David that at first, what I'm about to say is going to make absolutely no sense. But I guarantee you, there is a point to all
So you're
this.
warning our listeners as
yes.
well. Okay.
So as you know, I am a massive fan of The Simpsons, as is our fearless leader. By the way, happy birthday, Chase McCabe.
Suit.
Happy birthday, Chase. There is a famous episode of The Simpsons. It's the 15th episode of the critically acclaimed 4th season. It's entitled, I Love Lisa. It's a Valentine's Day themed episode in which Lisa Simpson, feeling bad for her dim-witted classmate Ralph Wiggum because nobody in the class is giving him a Valentine's Day card, she gives him a Valentine's Day card. And Ralph misinterprets the gesture and relentlessly pursues Lisa's affection. And it culminates with Lisa and Ralph attending a live taping of the Krusty the Clown show. And Ralph professes his love for Lisa on live television. And Lisa snaps at Ralph and says, I never liked you that way. The only reason I gave you that card is because nobody else did, and I felt sorry for you. And then the scene cuts to Bart Simpson sitting with Lisa on the couch and watching a replay of that moment. And Bart tells Lisa, you can actually pinpoint the second when his heart rips in half. And Bart clicks the remote a couple of times, going frame by frame, until he lands on this look of extreme anguish on Ralph's face. Now, all of you, again, are probably wondering, Adam, why are you summarizing the plot of a Simpsons episode that aired more than 30 years ago? Because I saw that same moment play out in real life as I watched Jared Stillman's interview with Barry Trotz yesterday. I was watching the stream, and Jared started his program by saying that Trotz needed to make it clear whether he was prioritizing winning now or building for the future. Basically, pick a lane, Barry. And this is what Barry said to that question.
What is your number one priority? What is your number one priority when it comes to this? Is your number one priority the 2026 Predators? Or is it the 2028 Predators, the 2029 Predators? And I'm saying 26 is like the playoff season. Are you looking at this saying, hey, you know, our top priority is to put a team out there this year to go compete? Or is your priority, hey, let's build this thing up in the future?
Well, I can answer that pretty easily. My priority is right now. I want to get us back into a position where we're fighting for a playoff spot. That last year we didn't get in that position. I feel if we get off to a good start, we'll be in that position. If we get to the position where we get in the playoffs, I think we can add some things because we got lots of assets. We got kids coming, and we got draft choices, all that. So I'll continue to do that. But my priorities now, with the eyes to the future, that's not anything I haven't said in the past. But I want to get the winning feeling again back here in this organization. Last year was a tough year, so I want to get that joy back. That's priority number one.
Not a surprising response from Barry Trotz to that question, but you could actually pinpoint the second when Jared Stillman's heart ripped in half as he heard that response. Because Jared has been adamant that we should judge Barry Trotz only by what happens a few years from now when these prospects develop and hopefully become regular contributing members of the team. But he heard that yesterday, and I could see the look of extreme anguish on his face when Trotz said that. So I just wanted to take the piss out of Jared a little bit this morning. That's what this whole thing was about. But Willie, as I said, between his news conference and his interview with Jared, Trotz spoke for about an hour. He did not have a 25 to 30 minute opening statement this time, as he did at his end of season news conference. But as you sift through everything that you heard from Trotz yesterday, what was your biggest takeaway from Trotz's multiple media availabilities?
I thought he was much clearer with his message yesterday. I thought he was able to address the two lanes that we've been talking about. And look, I'm not in the pick a lane. I'll tell you right now, he's doing both. He's been saying he's doing both. And you have to tell me where you think one screws up the other. And that's what Jared followed up with, about 72 follow-ups after that answer. Seriously.
No,
I was like, Jared, move on to another topic. He was like, well, what if this happens? What if that happens? It's like, Jared, he played gotcha with him. And Trotzy is very, very good at being patient with Jared as he does. And it was overall a great interview. Because once he got to some other things, there were some very good points. I really enjoyed the what are you trying to do with Andrew Burnett this summer to adjust? And Barry Trotz has often talked about Andrew Burnett's a young head coach that needs to grow and get better. He said, I made a lot of mistakes when I was a young coach, and I was able to work through those and become a better coach who eventually won a Stanley Cup. To me, that's more interesting. But if you want to just play the sports talk, hot take, gotcha, pick a lane, Barry. Okay, we want to dumb it down, fine. But I like nuanced conversation. I would like somebody to, and somebody could text me or anything, an example of who is being blocked right now. Tell me a prospect that you think is ready to play that is being blocked by anything they've done right now. And remember, we're just starting the offseason. There's going to be some moves here. Maybe a couple, probably not a lot. But if you want to tell me you're in one lane or the other and it's screwed up because you can't do both, tell me an example of why. Because anything that Jared asked, I didn't think that screwed up. Barry Trotz has said, I've got a group here. Mm-hmm. A lot of guys in the last year of their contracts. So there's a ton of flexibility on what to do with a big chunk of the roster. And I'll name the players. Michael Bunting, Eric Halla, Colton Sissons, Cole Smith, Michael McCarron. Those are just forwards. And let's go to the defensemen. Jeremy Lauzon, Justin Barron, Nick Blankenberg, all in the final year of their contract. You can keep them. You can move them. Lots of flexibility there. So this perception of, boy, you're loaded with all these contracts of 30-something. Not really. Not really. You've got a lot of flexibility there. And then tell me the people that are ready to come up. The guys he mentioned, Kemmel, Schaefer, Matthew Wood, David Etcher, those guys are likely not ready other than maybe some call-ups here or there. So I think it's set up so that you're covering both lanes. You're trying to win as best you can. Have a bounce back, get the winning feeling back. Who knows what could happen? The chemistry hopefully can be better and you could win. And you're not jeopardizing anything about, as Jared said, the 2020. And Jared's vision is the right vision. He is going to be judged on what happens in 28 and 29. That's, to me, the bigger question. This year is maybe they win. Hopefully they bounce back. But if they don't, they're not doing anything that's going to jeopardize 28, 29.
I will offer a counterpoint, and then I want to hear what Derek has to say. This was a column written by Gentry Estes in the Tennessean based off of yesterday's news conference. Gentry wrote in part, quote, "We like to present rebuilding or not as a binary decision, and it usually isn't. For Trotz, it certainly hasn't been. He has dipped toes in both pools. As the Preds GM, he has traded away a ton of players for draft picks, but he also made those expensive signings last summer. And a year later, those signings, including an 8-year extension for Saros, are beginning to look like overreactions by an inexperienced GM to a 2023-2024 season that went better than anticipated. To state the obvious, it's not exactly a safe bet to be doubling down on an old team that's coming off a 68-point season and didn't seemingly change much other than getting a year older. But in fairness to Trotz, I don't think he's being naive or foolish. I think he's in a bind. There isn't much else he can say or do. He's stuck with this roster and those contracts for players past their prime. Sad truth is that the next few seasons set up to potentially get worse for the gray-haired Predators before things can start getting better with an influx of drafted youngsters.
Okay, I just listed 10 players that are in the last year of their contract. They can turn that roster in a number of directions. The perception of the older players, it only applies to about 3 guys, right? You got Stamkos for 3. Let's say 5 guys. Saros, I still have a lot of problems with Saros. I wake up at night still angry at all the non-Avengers out there. I still think 30 out of 32 GMs would have done exactly what Barry Trotz did, and that's signed UC Saros. But every team has got guys signed to long-term deals. So that take by Gentry is, I guess, a basic take, but you're still not telling me anything in that article that affects the 28-29 team. Tell me, who's blocked?
I don't think it's so much of who's blocked. And Jared did a great job at trying to, just get out something, and Barry stuck to, what he said when he took the job, so that they're trying to mesh this young and this old team. And I don't want to say old as in, it's almost a bad thing to say, veteran team with the younger guys. They're trying to find a way to mesh it. I think the problem here was, and I agree with Estes on some of the Gentry on some of the things he said, because I was thinking the same thing. I think the problem here, or what has sort of made this thing the way it is that first year, that started because I asked this question of y'all the other day, I think through text. The process. Are you going to stick to the process, truly stick to it, or are you going to try to circumvent the process? And I brought that up because of something like this. When you come in as a new GM, and in your mind, you're thinking, okay, we're going to get these young guys. This is almost like a rebuilding year. In a sense, it was, because he started to trade away a lot of people. So it started to look like a rebuild, but then all of a sudden, on the second half, they started winning. So everybody in the building loves that feeling. So in the offseason is, what can I do with the talent that we already have that was winning games and playing the way they were? What can I do as a GM to expedite that, to fast forward when in fact you shouldn't have been doing that in a sense? So you go out and you get 3 guys in free agency that had really good seasons the year prior.
Yeah.
And you go out and get them and you think, okay, with these young guys and what they did the second half of the season, mess with these older veteran guys, this should be a playoff team. Well, it's not. So now the question is, do you continue down this road? Or do you say, you know what, we're just looking to 27, 28, somewhere around down the line for playoffs? You can't do that now. In a sense, you can't do that. But I like how Barry answered the question. We're still trying to win now, but there is an eye on the future. Whereas 2 years ago, the eye was solely on the future, but because of the way those young guys played, you almost got this false sense of, okay, we are better than what I thought we were going to be.
I think it would have looked pretty strange if after that very encouraging first year, he pivoted and just did a full rebuild.
But if he would have
wanted to do that,
but if he would have stuck
so.
with the process, I think it would have been a lot better.
Here's one thing.
It went horribly wrong last year. We all agree. The question is, what do you do at this point? Is Gentry basically saying you should dump everybody and just see if you can just break it down to the screws or the
you in it now?
I mean,
they are boxed in.
But no, you're not boxed in. I just listed
Willie,
10
it's not
players.
boxed in.
About
It's not
half of your
boxed in.
roster,
To be
half of your
fair,
roster
you're-
is flexible in the last year of the contract,
you're
and you're about to
mentioning-
get off the hook on a lot of salary cap dollars that you're paying to Matt Duchene.
A lot.
So in next year, they will have a lot of flexibility.
A lot is riding on players who are aging out of their primes. I know what you're saying.
Yes.
I know what you're saying.
They're not blocking the young guys.
Right. But the players you're mentioning are Michael Bunting and Michael
Yeah.
McCarron and Colton Sissons. They are boxed in with Roman Yossi. They are boxed in with Philip Forsberg. They are
Box
boxed
me in with Roman Yossi and
UC
Philip
Saros.
Forsberg. That's been the case for those are the franchise players.
that. I'm presenting the counter argument. But to Derek's point, I've always wondered this, and then we'll have to table this so we can get
right. And the Roman Yossi thing obviously is a major question, which to me that is a huge story as to what Roman Yossi are we going to see in this next stage of his career with these issues that he's dealing with. But we can't wind back the clock and say you should have not signed Roman Yossi to 8 years.
No, we're not going
Every
that far.
team has those guys.
No, I
Look
think,
at every roster. Go to capwages.com. Go to each roster. I will show you a group of 6 or 7 players that teams invest in the long-term contracts. And they're not getting great return on their investment right now, but there's nothing you can do about that.
so
That happens.
So I think if I want to make sure I'm summarizing Derek's point correctly, and then we'll table this to get to Scott Wheeler from The Athletic. I've always sort of wondered, it's like a butterfly effect type thing. What would have happened if the Predators hadn't gone on that 18-game point streak? What would have happened had the Predators missed the playoffs that season? Would the Predators have signed Steven Stamkos, Jonathan Marchessault, and Brady Shea? We'll
No.
never know the answer to that.
Well, we know the answer. No.
Okay.
The answer
well,
is
that's
no.
I think that's what Derek
And
is
that's what I'm
saying.
saying. You're circumventing the process all because
They thought they were ahead of schedule.
And if you look at it, you truly were not ahead of schedule. Now, adding maybe one guy to the mix,
Yeah.
okay, but you added 3 guys with contracts, even though they're not blocking the other guys. But eventually, nobody, unless there's a package that is just going to, nobody's going to want these guys, not because they don't think they can play, but because they're aging out. So you try, and this is what my thing was. When you try to circumvent the process that you came in with, then you may end up at a point where now you got to stay in it. Whatever decision you chose to make after that one season, you may have to play it out, whether it be good or
Okay.
bad. And I'm not talking about blocking the younger guy.
I would tell you this quickly, that the choices were try to, quote, as you're saying, circumvent the process, which is try to win while you
Yeah.
rebuild. The other option is to stink for 7 or 8 years. I don't like that. I like having a chance. I like having hope. This year, I'm not sitting there going, they're going to win the cup. I have hope, though, that if it goes right, they could have a good season, which would mean maybe getting back to the playoffs, maybe making a little noise in the playoffs. You never know what can happen. I know that if they had gone the other way, we'd be sitting there going, hey, maybe they'll have 80 points and maybe they'll get the high first-round pick again. Though that's a long, long road.
Let's table this. We have some reaction. We'll continue it after Scott Wheeler of The Athletic, the NHL draft analyst, will join us coming up next. 615-737-1025. If you have thoughts on this, get them in now. We will get back to them after Scott Wheeler. 615-737-1025. This Friday, join us at Bridgestone Arena for a party like no other and celebrate the future of Smashville at the Nashville Predators 2025 NHL Draft Party. More details at thegamenashville.com/events. Catch 1025 The Game's draft night in Smashville on Friday, starting at 6 p.m., powered by the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, Local 429. D. Mace, Vingan, and Donick, 1025, 1063, The Game. Willie Donick, Derek Mason, Adam Vingan here with you, joined on our phone line, driven by WilsonCountyHyundai.com, by the Athletics NHL Draft analyst, Scott Wheeler. Scott, glad to have you back on the program as the NHL Draft kicks off on Friday. Yesterday, you unveiled your final mock draft of the 2025 season, and you have the Predators taking Porter Martone, the 6'3", 208-pound winger, who had 98 points, including 37 goals in 57 games for Brampton of the Ontario League last season. What more can you tell us about the Predators' interest in Martone throughout the draft process and why you feel he is their guy at that spot?
Yeah, it's been a name that I've heard a lot sort of late in the process. I know that the Predators were around Brampton and their new arena in Brampton, well, old new arena, but their relocated arena in Brampton after the move from Mississauga slightly down the street to relocate the Steelheads for his draft year this year. I know they were in the building a lot. I know they have expressed a lot of interest in Porter over the course of the season. And you watch enough of Porter and you can see why he would be a natural fit for a team like the Predators, who are dying for a premium top of the lineup forward prospect, really one that they haven't ever had in the history of their organization, with all due respect to Philip Forsberg and David Legmond and some of the forwards that they've picked high. The true premium pieces that have come through Nashville have been Roman Josi and Seth Jones and Shea Weber and sort of on the blue line. And now is an opportunity, drafting as high as they are, which has also been a rarity for them as an organization over the years. Drafting as high as they are now is an opportunity to add a sort of truly, truly high-end player. There are a few there that I think they would consider. I think they should and will consider James Hagens out of Boston College. James is a high-end, high-skill centerman who would project potentially to be a first-line center for them someday, and certainly should be a top 6 player for them someday if they were to take him at number 5. But I've kept coming back, despite the quote-unquote perceived need within the Predators organization for a centerman. I kept coming back to Martone. I kept hearing Martone. He would add a little bit more size to their group. They do have some depth at the center ice position that's coming. Igor Surin was their first-round pick a year ago. Everybody was introduced to Fyodor Svechkov this year with the NHL roster a little bit. So they do have some young players coming down the middle. Obviously, they have sort of good depth on the wing as well, whether that's James Hagens' Boston College teammate, Teddy Stiga, or Matthew Wood, who everybody has been introduced to now a little bit. But they've got good depth within the pool, good depth within the organization. There should be waves of young talent on the way, Tanner Molendyke on the blue line, etc. But Martone would give them their top prospect, and it wouldn't even be close, frankly. And I'm a big, big believer in Tanner Molendyke, but just a true cut above that. So would James Hagens, for that matter. But Martone is the name that I've heard linked to them more often than Hagens in the last few weeks here.
So let's stick with James Hagens for a moment, Scott, because yesterday we shared your mock draft on the air and we received a lot of reaction about how Predators fans, they want a center. And you said that the Predators, there's a perceived need at center. How wide is the gap between Porter Martone and James Hagens? I know you and some of your colleagues at The Athletic did a big board today. I know they don't necessarily play the same position, but overall, how wide is the gap in your mind between Porter Martone and James Hagens in terms of their overall talent and their NHL prospects?
In my mind, it's very close. I have James Hagens 3rd on my list and Porter Martone 4th on my list. So they're back-to-back. They're both grouped within the same tier. I am, after having just said that I expect that it's more likely that they'll take Porter Martone, I actually have James Hagens a little bit higher. I would advocate, if I were sitting at that draft table, for James Hagens as the selection. But I can understand the arguments either way. Hagens is smaller. He's listed at 5'10.5". He's probably going to play at about 190 pounds. He's now up into the 180s after playing most of the last 3 years in the 170s. So he's added some weight. I know that's been a focus for him. Still plans to add another 5 or 8 pounds before he gets to his NHL playing weight. Going to be a competitive sort of well-rounded player, despite the fact that his game is sort of tilts towards offense and skill and playmaking, and his skating and his hockey IQ, which all get among the highest grades in the draft. I do think he's an underrated competitor, a sort of better, more competitive player than he got credit for from some scouts who saw him play at times against bigger opposition this year, and he did struggle against some bigger opposition in college hockey over the course of this season. But the case for Martone is a simple one. It's that he's bigger. He's more physically sort of developed. You run into Porter Martone around the rink, and he looks like he could step into an NHL dressing room tomorrow from a physical standpoint. Obviously, Hockey Canada recognized that when they had Porter be a part of the Men's World Championships this year. Porter doesn't have the dynamic skating that a player like James Hagens has. One of the sort of criticisms or knocks, if you will, on Porter Martone is sort of his pace of play, that he doesn't play with quite the same pace that some of the other top forward prospects, Hagens included in this draft class, can play with. Teams over the course of this season wanted to see him be more consistent from shift to shift and night to night in terms of his own competitiveness. Though I don't think that's an issue. Porter is a very competitive kid. He's worn the C for different teams over the course of the years. He's dropped the gloves in the OHL. He finishes his checks. It's more about just keeping his feet moving and being more involved on a consistent basis for Porter. Both of them project as first-line players in the NHL. I think if Hagens is to stick at center, he may end up as more of a 2C on a contending team than a true 1C on a contending team. But when I think about James Hagens, I think about Logan Cooley of the Utah Mammoth, and Logan Cooley is obviously a first-line player for the Utah Mammoth, and had a 70-plus point season for the Utah Mammoth a year ago, and is one of the bright young players in the world. So I think you look at James Hagens and you look at a player who's on a similar path to that can become a top of the lineup center. Maybe isn't the 100-point guy that every team wants, but has the skill level and the craft and the creativity and the hockey sense and the skating to project into a point per game top of the lineup player. Now, on the flip side, I think Porter Martone also has that, just as a winger and in a much different mold, frankly, as a player. So it'll come down to preference. It'll come down to what the Preds feel about their organization in terms of the size of their pool, and whether they might view James Hagens as a little bit too small for the complexion of their team. And then there was another name that I'll add to the list that I heard after my mock draft dropped yesterday, and that's Brady Martin's name. And Brady is really in that mix from 4 to 7, an ultra competitor who would fit with Zachary Leroux and some of the other players that the Predators have drafted and brought into the organization in recent years. But Martin maybe doesn't have the high-end skill or the high-end point production projectability that a player like Porter Martone or James Hagens has. But what Brady Martin does have is sort of the motor that never stops, the most physical player in the draft, the most competitive player in the draft, the fiercest competitor in the draft. Use whatever cliche you want. That's sort of Brady Martin's identity.
Talking to Scott Wheeler. And Scott, we put a lot of stock in your mock drafts, and I'm really curious, as you adjust, because it's changed a little bit. I can remember reading one you did while the season was still going on, then sort of one in between where we last had you on, and there's little tweaks. I'm curious, is it more you trying to drill down on what you think teams are looking at? What has you shuffling your lineup a little bit at this stage?
Well, there are sort of touch points over the course of May and June where there are natural points to engage with teams and sort of source new information. There are natural points to engage with agents. So I always sort of do 3 mocks, and I do them at 3 of the exact same timestamps in the calendar, if you will, each year. So I do one coming out of the draft lottery when there's a natural point to text some sources and text whether it's coaches of these players in terms of asking them which teams they've heard from the most over the course of the season, or general managers of these players at the junior level, or their agents, though you have to take agents with the requisite grain of salt, or even NHL scouts and sort of what they've heard about the teams around them. The natural points for that are coming immediately out of the draft lottery. Obviously, the Combine in Buffalo, which I attend every year and is a sort of gold mine, for, if you will, for reconnecting with some people. And then obviously the last one, which is the week sort of right leading into the draft, which is when this most recent mock sort of dropped. So I'll hear different things over the course of that period. I'll have agents giving me shouts about their guys. I'll have sort of come back and forth with scouts for my scout survey that I do, and all sorts of things that sort of produce the information that I'm looking for. And then it's about putting the conflicting things I've heard sort of in a web, if you will, and trying to navigate who I trust and where I think things will go. And then also considering what I know about each prospect pool's needs and each scouting department's preferences and all of that. So a complicated web. I was really, really proud of my mock draft a year ago for 2024. And I think I've got a really good handle on this year's, but it's always a game of who can you trust and sort of weighing different things against each other. And in this draft class in particular, I mentioned this in my mock draft, but there are 8 players that everybody tells me aren't going to get past the top 7 teams in terms of 6 Philadelphia and 7 Boston. I keep hearing that there are 3 different guys that those 2 teams won't let sort of slide past them, and yet one of them has to, right? So It's also sort of piecing that together. This draft very much is a draft class that has emerged with a consensus 8 players at the top, and yet there are 7 teams that I think are interested in various ways in those 8 players.
Scott, Barry Trotz did a press conference yesterday and also did a one-on-one interview with our station. And he did some talking about Roger McQueen. He talked about him as sort of a wild card. I noticed you have him 10th, but Barry Trotz was obviously very intrigued with him. And he laid out all the things you have about the injury and everything like that. But the upside seems to be very high with him.
Yeah, had Martone or had McQueen been healthy, 2 very good hockey names that I've got mixed up there, Roger McQueen and Porter Martone. How about that for an NHL hockey player? But no, McQueen has been a source of fascination throughout this process. He originally hurt his back over a year and a half ago, 2 winters ago. There were 3 different stints that he came back and sort of the back issues lingered. And he had mentioned to a reporter about a year and a half ago that it was a herniated disc. And then he says now that was misdiagnosed and that it's actually less serious than that. And herniated disc get people's backs up because of the way that they can linger over the course of their careers. And the many NHL players that have dealt with them and really battled back issues over the course of their careers. And then you get to the finish line, and ultimately he's now back skating. He participated in the testing at the combine, which was important for him to showcase that he was there physically. And you've got to make that calculation for each organization as to, okay, this kid coming into the draft year, had he been healthy, was probably a top 5, top 6 pick in the class. And where's our comfort level? Is it at 6, 7, 8? Is it at 9, 10, 11? I think that's the decision that a lot of those teams in that sort of 5 to 10 range are having to grapple with. If you were to get to the Pittsburgh Penguins, who now have back-to-back picks at 11 and 12, I would fully expect that that's the floor for McQueen, that he doesn't sort of slip past the Penguins, who I know have expressed interest in Roger this year. But I expect him to go in front of that. I think the Anaheim Ducks at 10 would strongly consider him and could bring some of that risk into the fold, given the strength of their established sort of young core and prospect pool. I think the Seattle Kraken at number 8, the Sabres at number 9 are all teams that could and will strongly consider McQueen. I'm not sure. I'm less convinced, I should say, that he'll break into that sort of top 7 group that I talked about. When I hear about those 8 names that aren't going to get outside of the top 7 picks, he's not one of those 8 names. And I think those 8 names will go in front, are more likely to go in front of Roger than they are to go behind him. But I think he's very much in the mix at 8, 9, 10, 11.
All right, real quick. Do you think we're having Vern Fiddler on our show tomorrow? We would love the story of Vern's son, Blake, who I think was born in Nashville, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
Going to the Preds. Any shot there?
Not out of the question. They obviously have 2 picks in the 20s, and that's Blake's range. He's going to be a 20s pick in this draft. They also sort of could use a player of his profile. I talked about Tanner Molendyk off the top. He's the opposite handedness of Tanner Molendyk, so you immediately wonder whether, hey, this WHL kid and this other WHL kid, both great skaters, both opposite handedness. Could they maybe someday be a second pairing for you, right? And they're also very different players, despite being plus level skaters. Molendyk is a much smaller player. Molendyk's about 5'11", 6 feet, and an elite skater. Blake Fiddler is 6'4", 6'5", and a very good skater. Molendyk plays a much busier, aggressive game in terms of transporting pucks all over the ice and using his mobility to jump up into the play and playing tight gaps. Blake plays a more passive game, has less offense in his game, and you immediately start to wonder, okay, maybe these two kids could complement each other. Maybe Blake could be a good complement to a player like Molendyk someday. So I'd be surprised if Blake's not in that mix for them. Would not be the least bit surprised if they pick him, whether it's at 22 or at 26 with either of those selections. I think Blake belongs right there in that range. Blake is never going to be a power play quarterback in the NHL, I don't think. The criticism of him, or one of the sort of areas of development for him from NHL scouts that you constantly hear about, is just his puck play. He can be a little stilted with the puck. He doesn't have a ton of natural offense, but he's 6'5" and he can skate, and he's got a good head on his shoulders, and he's by all accounts a great kid. And I did a feature on him at The Athletic this year and could see that in some of the reporting that I did about him as well. And he just projects to have a very long career. And really, the game is trending in the direction of players like Blake Fiddler, who are just sort of steady, reliable, lengthy, mobile defenders. That's the way that the St. Louis Blues were built when they won their Stanley Cup. It's the way the Tampa Bay Lightning were built when they won their Stanley Cup. It's the way the Vegas Golden Knights were built when they won their Stanley Cup. That premium of size and skating goes a long way in the NHL today. And he's got that, even if he's maybe never going to have a 40 or 50 point season as a sort of first round pick defenseman.
Scott Wheeler, the Athletics NHL draft analyst, joining us on D. Mace, Vingan, and Donick. Scott, thank you so much for your time. I know this is a busy week for you. Enjoy the festivities, and we will catch up soon.
Cheers, fellas. Can't wait to get down to LA tomorrow.
Scott Wheeler joining us on the program. A lot to react to there, and we will do so coming up next at 615-737-1025. Your reaction as well on our phone and text lines, driven by WilsonCountyHyundai.com. This week's Nashville's best deal is Red's Hot Chicken. Red's Hot Chicken on West End is bringing the heat. Don't miss their hot chicken and waffles or the mac and cheese crunch wrap. Grab a $30 gift card now for only $15 while supplies last at thegamenashville.com/deals. D. Mace, Vingan, and Donick, 102.5, 106.3 The Game. Willie Donick, Derek Mason, Adam Vingan here with you. By the way, it appears our phone lines are a bit wonky right now. So if you want to react, text us, 615-737-1025. We'll figure out what's going on with the phones. Thank you to Scott Wheeler of The Athletic for joining us. Really interesting conversation. It really does sound, Willie, that Porter Martone is the Predators guy if it shakes out the way that Scott Wheeler thinks it's going to shake out, and Martone is available at 5. A big-bodied winger, 6'3", 200-plus pounds, had nearly 100 points in juniors last season, 30-plus goals. Predators need all of that. But I certainly do think there's going to be a lot of reaction if Martone is the pick from Predators fans saying, he's not a center. We need a center. I do think that's inevitable, but some really interesting notes on there, especially comparing Martone and Hagens in different areas.
Yeah, I think Martone and Hagens are probably getting the most discussion for those that are following it close. And, of course, they don't pick till 5, so there's a chance that one or both could get picked or something like that. So, look, I'll be honest, and I'm the announcer for the team. I haven't watched these guys play, right? It's not like NFL football where you're like, yeah, you know what? I saw Cam Ward play a few times.
I'll be tuning into the NBA
we saw
draft.
him play, right?
I'll be tuning into the NBA draft tonight.
Even the
NBA draft tonight. I'll know all those guys.
Right. Well, I don't know all of them, but I watched a lot of them. That's not the case in the NHL draft. So if you're arguing for a certain guy, are you telling me you watched the guy play? No.
They're going by what they're hearing.
If you're just arguing about a center, you're just arguing philosophy. You don't know the person. You haven't been scouting these guys. So I try not to weigh in real heavy on one guy or another, right? Because I listened for some things that Barry said. He said there might be some guys, and I think based on the description of Wheeler there, Martone physically might be closer to being able to handle the rigors of being in the NHL at age 18. And some guys aren't that physically mature yet, but you're projecting down the line when they are, they might have a higher ceiling. That's a really important question. To me, that's what I'm thinking about. And Barry Trotz said there's some guys that might be closer to being ready now, but there might be some guys that 3-5 years from now, which is way more important, might have a higher ceiling, but they're not the type of guy they're going to jump right into the lineup right now. I think Jared specifically asked Hagens, a guy who's already played a year of college, if you drafted your number 5 pick and he went back to college, would that be somehow disappointing? But to me, that's not, I'm not worried. Anything that this kid, whoever they pick at 5, would give them this year would be gravy. To me, the question is Jared's vision of the 28-29 Predators, which is a really important year. That's an important year.
Well, Predators fans, Derek, talking about the importance of center. If you have been a Predators fan since the franchise became the Predators nearly 30 years ago, you've been lusting after that top line center for basically the entire existence of the Nashville Predators. And you watch all of the teams that you consider competitive in terms of actually having a chance to win the Stanley Cup. And you see Alexander Barkov, and you see Connor McDavid, and you see Nathan McKinnon, and you see these centers who were drafted high, and Predators fans are not the only ones saying, man, how can I get myself one of those? And the Predators, as we know, have not had the opportunity to pick this high very often. It's happened how many times, Willie? 3 times, right?
This is the third.
In the history of the franchise
to this point,
that the Predators will have a top 5 pick. The first time in more than 10 years. The last time they took a defenseman, because as we discussed yesterday, nobody thought Seth Jones would make it to 4, but he did. The Predators took the best player available. And of course, they took David Legwand. So Predators fans haven't had that center. So I think there are a lot of Predators fans that, let's just say James Hagens for the purpose of this argument. They're like, James Hagens can be that guy for us, hopefully. I think that's why a lot of Predators fans are hyper-focused on them taking a center instead of a winger.
But I did mention this yesterday, so I'm going to mention again. These kids are 18 years old. James Hagens is a center now. Is he a center for life? Maybe. Have you watched him play?
I can't say I've watched a single
Exactly.
meaningful shift
Okay.
of hockey that James Higgins
Now,
has played.
you hope that he is. So this is all philosophical, okay? None of us are evaluators of 18-year-old hockey players. I'm not. But there are plenty of guys in other sports that you hope when you draft them, they are a center. Matthew Wood was drafted as a center. Right now, I would tell you that there's a very good chance that Matthew Wood ends up being a winger. And there's nothing wrong with that if he ends up being a really good player. You hope a lot. It's just like I said yesterday with shortstops in baseball, tackles in football, corners in football. You hope that they stay at that position because it's more of a premium position. But you can move them to another spot and still get a lot. So that's the caveat. So you say, I've got to have a center. I got to have a center. Well, that center could end up being a wing in about 3 years. There's a lot of them. Philip Tomasino was drafted as a center. Hasn't played center at all in the NHL.
I think Barry Trotz made this point before we bring in Jonathan Hutton on the other side. I think Barry Trotz made this point during his news conference yesterday, talking about the positional preference. And he brought up Brady Tkachuk, who was drafted with the 4th overall pick in the 2018 draft. We all saw Brady Tkachuk during the Four Nations face-off. That guy is an animal, right? He's a winger.
Yeah.
The player drafted directly in front of him, Barry did not mention his name. I think it may have escaped him. Jesperi Kotkaniemi is a center. Kotkaniemi has never lived up to the expectations of being the number 3 overall pick in the NHL draft. He started in Montreal. I believe he was offer sheeted by the Hurricanes.
Correct.
And it has never worked out for Kotkaniemi. He has not lived up to that billing.
But he's a good player.
Yes.
But he's not a great player.
Which is your point.
Right.
Like if you're focused on the center, you may miss out on a player who's more talented, even if he's not a natural center.
100 out of 100 would take Brady Tkachuk over Kotkaniemi, and they would be like, why are you even asking this question? But that might have been, I don't know, but that might have been the thinking. Hey, Kotkaniemi's a center. Brady Tkachuk's not a center. We need a center. How dumb does that look now? Brady Tkachuk is a great player. So if that's the argument, then you have to consider that.
Barry said whatever falls to him, they're going to get a good player, he feels. Whether it's a center or someone else, he feels the position that they're in, the guys that they've scouted, they are going to get a good player. Now, whether it's a center or not is yet to be seen. But I think a lot of people want someone that can play now. They understand that, more than likely, we won't see this guy for another, at least 4 or 5 years, really getting to the, on the roster and start making real strides. I think the fan base wants somebody that they could look at and say, he can play now at that position. Now, whether it happens or not, yet to be seen, but to have, and I don't want to, because maybe y'all can help me with this, Willie, after we finish talking with Hut. Do Predator fans, me included, do we really understand that hockey is different from any other sport? That you draft a guy 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th overall, you may not see him. And,
right.
and I understand.
I don't think it really clues into the casual
exactly.
fan.
That's what I'm saying. Do it really, do it really resonate with them? Because they're looking at it like, we want somebody that can play now.
It rarely happens.
Exactly.
It rarely happens. We discussed this the other day. Since 2000, there have been 4 players drafted 5th overall who have appeared in at least 10 games for the team that drafted them the following season. 4 players in the past 25 years drafted number 5 overall. So
and of those 4, I can't remember exactly the names.
Kessel, Luke Shen, Elias Lindholm, and Noah Hannafin.
Yeah, and I'd have to look at the stats, but I don't remember any of those 4 guys being instant, like, rookie of the year impact guys.
I don't think so. I'll have to go back and
look. But we'll have to look.
615-737-1025. We will take a Predators breather, bring in Jonathan Hutton. I smell collusion in the NFL. We will discuss that with Jonathan Hutton and more coming up next. 615-737-1025. Willie Donick, Derek Mason, Adam Vingan. 1025-1063, The Game. D-Mace, Finnegan, and Donick, 102.5, 106.3 The Game. Broadcasting from the Busy Bee Plumbing, Heating, and Air Conditioning Game Nashville Studios, home of the $99 yearly Beehive membership, where the buzz is always about great service. And we are presented by Bet365. Whatever the moment, it's never ordinary at Bet365. Willie Donick, Derek Mason, Adam Vingan here with you. Pleased to be joined. Do we have Jonathan Hutton? We do. Pleased to be joined. But please be boined. I don't know what that means. Pleased to be joined by Jonathan Hutton from Hot Mic with Hutton and Withrow. Hutton, how are you?
I'm great, guys. Hope you're doing well.
We are, and we wanted to save this topic. We're going to talk about it after you leave our show today, but we wanted to start the conversation with you. This report from, it was sort of a tag team effort by Pablo Torre and Mike Florio about the potential of collusion among NFL owners, from Mark Maskey of the Washington Post, who summarizes it thusly, quote, an arbitrator dismissed a case filed by the NFL Players Association in 2022, alleging the NFL and teams improperly colluded to prevent certain players from receiving fully guaranteed contracts, even while finding that the league's labor negotiating unit encouraged teams to reduce guaranteed money in players' contracts. That smells a whole heck of a lot like collusion to me. It centers around the Deshaun Watson fully guaranteed contract, and it focuses on three quarterbacks specifically: Kyler Murray, Lamar Jackson, and Russell Wilson. What do you make of this story, and how apparently the NFL, I mean, because the arbitrator ruled in the NFL's favor, but what do you make of this whole story?
Well, first off, there absolutely is. The owners were pissed off at Jimmy Haslam. Let's just put it that way, about the contract for Deshaun Watson. There's no doubt about that. I instead of naming the quarterbacks, okay, Russell Wilson. Let's go back to this. Kyler Murray, and who was the third?
Lamar Jackson.
Okay, Lamar's going to count in my response here. But to me, it really comes down to a few other quarterbacks, not Kyler Murray and not Russell Wilson. It comes down to Lamar Jackson, Joe Burrow, and Justin Herbert. If those three at the time, if those three demanded the fully guaranteed money and said, we're not going to play, we're out, we're going to collude together, that we're going to get fully guaranteed money, because, I mean, we are the face of the franchise, we're the face of the league. What would the owners do at that point? They would have to give the money to those top quarterbacks. Now, I know Russell Wilson ends up getting paid handsomely for what happened in Denver, and Kyler Murray's getting a restructure and gets the money that he wants, but he's on a different tier than the level that we saw. The quarterbacks are continuing to become the highest paid player in the NFL, but what they're not getting is the fully guaranteed money and the true value. I mean, you could argue Patrick Mahomes is underpaid as it is right now for his value to not just the team, but the league. I should throw in Josh Allen as well with what I'm saying. There was a top tier group of quarterbacks that were up for extensions, and they took a ton of money, but they didn't take the fully guaranteed money. They're filthy rich, they're wealthy, but they're not Major League Baseball or the NBA. And the only way that's going to turn is if the quarterbacks band together and do that. But those guys are now under contract for a certain amount of time, and it'll be a while before we see a group like that come together where their contracts are expiring around the same time, about a year within each other. That doesn't happen often. We saw a batch of them happen all at once about a year and a half ago.
Well, I'm going to tell you right now, because we saw this many years ago. I believe, Willie, you may know this, in the 80s, where they formed this quarterback club.
Oh,
and it was all Steinberg. I think it was all to circumvent, the power within the NFL, because if your quarterbacks aren't on board, that's
right.
Majority of your power right there. And I see it the same way. These quarterbacks will never be on board with this. Never. Why? Because they are a separate entity from everybody else. And they will find a way to not get quarterbacks on board with guaranteed contracts, like fully guaranteed contracts, because they understand, like you said, if you can get the quarterbacks all together that says, you know what, hey, because a lot of these quarterbacks outside of Patrick Mahomes are signing 4-year deals, 5-year deals, where they know they can re-up and they're still in the prime of their career. Well, if that's the case, then the only way this is going to change, because right now no one believes Roger Goodell. He's lost all credibility now that this stuff has come out. Okay,
Sure.
so the only way that the players, and I fought the players, they're a bunch of weak ass people. I'm telling you that right now. The players, a bunch of weak ass people right now. Okay, because the only way they can get what they want is that they get the quarterbacks involved. But the quarterbacks ain't gonna get involved because they are making the bulk of the money. And
They are.
And some reason the owners have found a way to keep the quarterbacks out the conversation. Because remember a few years ago, I believe, when Tom Brady said something during the lockout, one of those quarterbacks said something during the lockout, and it became big news. And then after that, you didn't hear anything else about it because they understand if we can keep the quarterback separate from the players, we're good. And that's what they've been able to do. And it's going to continue to be that way.
Well, and hey, there was Lamar Jackson came out and said he wanted fully guaranteed money. You know, he was representing himself.
But he was by himself. But
he was mocked
exactly
publicly. They're like kind of
they made him seem they made Lamar seem like a bad person. Like he was bad for asking for guaranteed money.
In the moment, I'm thinking, this is how you raise the bar if you're coming up for the next CBA. And it's not every quarterback. There's a top tier of about 7 to 8 guys. And then there's a real drop-off. There were over 50 quarterbacks that played in the league last year alone. And knowing that, and the drop-off between the starter and the backup across the board, there's a significant dip where you don't. I mean, that's the reason why you have the television money that you have. It starts with the QBs. You're right, Mace. We didn't see it, and we're not going to see it if this group didn't do it. And Lamar was actually trying to push that forward based on what Deshaun Watson had. He was representing himself, and doing so, he was speaking publicly about what he was trying to get. And we saw what ended up happening. They more or less said, we'll call your bluff, see if another team will offer you or match you or what we're going to give you. That was the threat, was the franchise tag. And that didn't happen. The other teams didn't bite on that because, well, of what you're speaking of, Mace. All the owners are trying to keep it low where they can. The money's always going to go up, but the quarterbacks, if they keep them happy, the rest of the position, like the running backs holding a Zoom call, wanting more money, screw that. You got to have the quarterbacks get more money first.
Because I think at that point,
that's it.
Lamar had proven that he was the player that Baltimore drafted him and thought he would be once they developed him. At that point, he was that guy.
He was MVP.
Yeah, he was MVP. So my thing was, they wanted to make sure that he was the guy that could do it, but they wanted to make sure he couldn't. So when he started to come out about this, well, Lamar don't have an agent. He doesn't know what he's doing. He's greedy. Right. He's not thinking about team. They threw all these bad things at him to make it seem like from a national standpoint that, you know, that he was just a greedy player that wanted money and didn't think about the team when trying to build. And when in actuality, he was worth every bit that he was asking for.
And let's face it, if Deshaun Watson can get fully guaranteed money, those dudes can do it. I mean, that's just, I mean, we saw an owner give it to Deshaun Watson. Mm-hmm. So, and the chase was on. Arthur Blank was in on with the chase for Watson. So was New Orleans. Jimmy Haslam wasn't the only owner, but that put it over the top.
Yeah, because you can't tell me that this is a quarterback-driven league, and when a quarterback of Lamar caliber is about to hit the market, you can't tell me that if it wasn't collusion or something being thrown out, that every team that needed a quarterback wouldn't be first in line to give him a fully guaranteed, knowing that the quarterback is the most essential position in the game.
I don't know if it's every team, but it's at least one team, Mace. That's all.
That's all it takes,
right? It just takes one owner, and that's what we saw with the Browns. So yeah, I mean, sure. There's another owner. There's another team that could use Lamar Jackson, and given the money, I mean, the money's always huge in the moment. 5 years down the road, they're going to super exceed that number to begin with. So, you know, in terms of the money that's going out to the players, the owners are making more than half, more than double of what the players are getting as a total on their team, on their roster, just on the TV contracts alone. But with that in mind, it starts with the QBs. They're taking a ton of money. I'm not trying to like argue that they're not getting paid well.
Oh yeah,
they are.
Absolutely.
But it's nothing. It's that you have to have them champion the rest of the players in the union. And when you're not doing that as a collective group, when they had the opportunity with the young guys that were going into contract number 2, it's just not going to happen because it takes more than one individual to do it. We saw that with Watson.
I tell you, the only way it happens that I see, I got 2 for you real quick before I pass to Willie, is that last year's group of quarterbacks, those 7 guys that got drafted, they're all going to be up right around the same time. The only way it happens is if they're successful, before the contract is up. If they're successful, and then all of them come together and say, listen, we want guaranteed contracts.
Well, they have to live up to the expectations.
And that's what I'm saying. They have to live up to the expectations because the last time we were talking about a class this good was what, 85 with Marino and all those guys?
Yeah, 83 with Marino at Elway.
Yeah, all those guys. Yeah. That's the last time we really talked about a group of guys that were that good. Now we talk about a group of guys that could potentially be that good with last year's group of guys. So again, they all will want a contract right around the same time. The only way it changes is that all those guys get together as Goodell tried to get the owners to get together and say, hey, listen, this is probably the best opportunity we have to get guaranteed contracts. So let's all get together and discuss how we proceed in this.
It's clearly easier said than done. It's not. I'm not trying to argue
that
they didn't try to get it. They did. I'm sure they tried to get it, but I mean, it's not like Tom Brady and Peyton Manning didn't get this. So I mean, they got paid well, but they didn't get what the fully guaranteed that we saw with Watson. But the opportunity was there with Lamar Jackson, who spoke it into existence. He wanted to do that. And the players didn't even back that. The rest of the quarterbacks didn't jump on board with that. And again, it's a get yours type of league. Individually, are you thinking about the future of the league? Or are you thinking about what you're getting right now? You're thinking about what you're getting right now and setting up your family. I understand that. But until that changes, it's still going to be the weakest union of the professional sports that we say is the top tier in the U.S. because the CBA is highly leaning towards the owners in this case when the other leagues are not.
Another aspect of this story that I find very interesting is the media coverage of it. I am the oldest guy in the conversation here. And I can remember in the 80s, the baseball owners got nailed for collusion, for basically colluding and conspiring not to sign other people's free agents because free agency was moving at a real high rate, and they got busted, and they had to pay millions and millions of dollars in damages to the players. To me, when I read this email from Roger Goodell, and this is the beauty of email, it's in there, right? You can't say, I was misquoted. That's not what I said in my email.
John Gruden tried that. It didn't work for him.
I know, but he said, agreed. They said the tip of the market is most of the dollars, and we'll wait to see how it falls. It will be too late to counter. Agree with raising a big concern that this will erode a key aspect of our CBA that resisted guaranteed money, except as clubs determined on their own. When I see that, to me, that is clear evidence that they colluded. And Roger Goodell is supposed to be, I know he works for the owners, but he's supposed to be at least somewhat objective and let the owners do what they want to do and give some hope that the players can fend for themselves and do it. He takes a side here and he basically encourages his lawyer to tell the owners, do not sign guaranteed contracts. And that's collusion. So here's where I'm going with this. Back in the 80s, it was a pretty big story. But this kind of story, you've got a lot of partners like ESPN and the NFL.
Yes.
They're not excited about really taking shots at the NFL, even though to me, they are dead to rights here. And also, it's not a sexy story that shows like ours and podcasts and the way we do media now with hot takes and everything. It's just a nuanced story that, it might be boring to a large percentage of the audience. Therefore, I think this helps the NFL get away with this kind of stuff.
Well, you know what, Willie? I totally agree with that. What it takes, though, for us collectively as a media to push it is the headline makers have to push it.
Yes.
Think about that.
Good point.
If the top quarterbacks, let's just go back to them. Everyone in town right now is covering tight end U. It's the place to be. It's a tight end camp, and it's all the talk. Everyone wanted to go to the concert last night. If the quarterbacks want to band together and say this is blatant, this has happened to us, then it becomes a story. Then we start to follow it because they're speaking out on behalf of the players when they weren't doing that and haven't done that as a collective group. I'm saying in quite some time. So unless that's going to happen, it's just going to go under the radar because it's just a bunch of court decision stuff right now. It takes more than that. Like Caitlin Clark, we're all talking Caitlin Clark. It's more than a stat sheet though that we're talking about with her. There's some drama, there's some rival,
yes.
there's a lot going on there. You have to have the other end of this where the quarterbacks are speaking out on behalf of the players and behalf of them, because that's what Goodell is talking about. It takes that aspect to go public and push it. And then you've got, you've got quite the jet fuel to the story once you have that, because then you go to the owners for a rebuttal.
Hutton, before we let you go, I thought that you and Chad were having a really interesting conversation last week on Hot Mic, discussing the Stanley Cup final. The ratings for the Stanley Cup final were not great. And you wondered aloud, does hockey have an America problem? I would love for you to expand your thoughts on that, because I thought the conversation you had with Chad was quite interesting.
Well, so we were discussing, does America have a hockey problem? Does hockey have an America problem? And so just from the view.
Is that America or America?
America. Where, I mean, quite frankly, though, the teams that are winning are America, Yeah,
it's true.
And
30 years and counting.
That's part of it. But it's not like the fan base is weak where they're winning championships. It's just not going to happen. I pointed out, though, look, going into the Cup final, going into the NBA finals, based on who's matched up, you're automatically going to cut off half of the rating just from the view, knowing that you have Canada on one side of it, because you're viewing the Canadian ratings for the NHL there. I mean, I do think from a marketing standpoint, having it on the quote unquote cable versus the network, that plays a huge factor.
No question.
It still does. So we have to point that out too. But knowing that it was Willie, was it on TNT last year?
No, it was on ABC.
It was on ABC
last year. ABC.
Okay. So the ratings
that makes
were
a
higher
huge
for the same matchup last year.
Yeah, big difference, and that's what
why,
you're talking
that's
about.
Why
the network is a big
difference. That's to me that's why. But I do feel that it's got to be more than just about the game. There's got to be some drama there. It doesn't have to be manufactured. It's already there. Just push it out to us. Let us know that you've got a little trash talk going on, and really push into that, because from where we were on NBA All-Star Weekend, where you had the U.S. against Canada, and they stole the weekend away from the NBA.
Yes.
To now discussing what's going on here. I think you've got to get that grip on the tension that goes into this, and tell the story of a team that's looking to go back to back. I view it like that. I think it's more of hockey in America than it is America and hockey, personally.
I do think that
I don't know where you guys come down on that, but I lean that way.
I do think that there is a story out there. I think I know how the story is going to end. But if ESPN wants to dive into hockey and drum up some of that drama,
sure,
lean into the Connor McDavid free agent decision. Like, I know that he is
the decision part two,
right? It could be the decision
later.
Part two, but he is eligible for a contract extension next week. He's 1 year out from free agency. More than likely, he's going to end up in Edmonton. But the idea of a player of McDavid's caliber still floating out there, technically, right? Like, that is the type of thing that could drum up the general interest when a superstar player has a decision to make, a la LeBron James. It does drum up a lot of interest.
And what they have also, what they don't have, excuse me, is Stephen A. Smith, who is the most popular talking head for the NBA. Like he's the biggest star of the NBA Finals. If you want to just look at it, I mean, he was making more headlines and was discussed more than the players
By playing
in the NBA.
solitaire, like that.
Playing
that
solitaire
was a
and
new
talking about
cycle.
Halliburton. like yeah, just I mean, seriously though, like he was discussed more than some of the players, including the MVP. Hockey doesn't have that, but that plays a factor because he's on First Take and he's not going to talk hockey. So I say all that to mean like it has to have that little extra edge. It doesn't have to be USA against Canada. It can't manufacture that because that's organic. What I'm saying, you have to get into what is already there and tell us the story and remind us that the game's on, because you're at a disadvantage based on where you're playing.
Jonathan Hutton from Hot Mike with Hutton Withrow joining us as he does every Wednesday on D. Mace, Vingen, and Donick. Great stuff as always, Hutton. We'll catch up next week.
Yep. Have a great rest of the week, guys.
You as well. Jonathan Hutton on the program. We actually do have a technical note. If you have a Verizon phone, there must be some sort of Verizon outage. So if you're trying to call us on a Verizon phone, you may not be able to get through. So sorry, Verizon users. But if you don't have Verizon, give us a call, 615-737-1025. You can also text us. I think Verizon users can also text us, 615-737-1025. Our phone lines are driven by WilsonCountyHyundai.com. Join Robbie and Rex Road as the program broadcasts live at the Duncan Grand reopening in Hermitage at 5205 Old Hickory Boulevard this Friday. Starting at 8 a.m., the first 100 people in line will win free coffee for 100 days, plus 1025 The Game will have your chance to win tickets to an upcoming Nashville concert.
Okay, I have to say that I recently saw the Seinfeld episode about shrinkage, and it is a hilarious episode. And I'm going to apply it to our loan pronto ad, not maybe in the way you think. But if you're looking at your credit card bill every month and you're like, I'm just not shrinking the bill. I'm paying the minimum. I'm spinning my wheels. My bill is still out there because of the high interest debt. Let me introduce you to Loan Pronto's Rapid Equity Loan Program. If you're a homeowner, use your home's equity and take some thousands of dollars, whatever the number you need is, to get that bill shrunk down to zero. That's what you do. You borrow money from your home's equity. One client got, say, $100,000. They were approved in under 24 hours. And then you get that cash, boom. Your credit card bill is shrunk to nothing. Boom. That's what you want. And you will probably improve your monthly budget a ton. That is the idea behind the Rapid Equity Loan Program at Loan Pronto. So call Loan Pronto for a free instant home appraisal. See how much money that you qualify for today. Loan Pronto is 8+ rated by the BBB. They have nearly 2,500 5-star Google reviews. 615-499-5780 or loanpronto.com. 615-499-5780 or loanpronto.com. Equal housing lender, NMLS 1661781 on approved credit, NMLSconsumeraccess.org.
the Cardinals were going to hold firm and not give Kyler Murray a fully guaranteed contract. And his agent tried, but ultimately they didn't get one. And that's fine. But the most compelling aspect of that, Dean Spanos, the owner of the Chargers, reaches out to Michael Bidwell, the owner of the Cardinals, and we'll post something at PFT with the full exchange. Text messages that came into evidence. Spanos congratulated Bidwell on getting the deal done. Spanos said this will help us with our quarterback. In other words, because you didn't give Kyler Murray a fully guaranteed contract, because your deal is more like the pre-Deshaun Watson deals than the Deshaun Watson contract, we're in a better position to fend off an effort by Justin Herbert's camp to get a fully guaranteed contract. See, that's what this was about. When Deshaun Watson does his deal, is this a sea change or is it an aberration? The NFL went to work to make it an aberration. And they had to hold the rope through those three negotiations: Murray, Wilson, and Jackson. And then by the time those three quarterbacks don't get fully guaranteed contract, okay, threat neutralized.
That was Mike Florio discussing the findings in an arbitration case. The full report was published the other day by Pablo Torre and Mike Florio. They sort of tag teamed on this, I think. But for those who missed it, the full ruling, and this is from the website Defector, which is, I think, run by a lot of the old Deadspin folks. The full ruling is primarily concerned with a March 2022 meeting between NFL owners and the NFL Management Council. Remember the NFL Management Council. They are an important part of this. This meeting occurred just a few weeks after Deshaun Watson signed an unprecedented 5-year, $230 million contract with the Cleveland Browns that was fully guaranteed. The NFLPA argued that during this meeting, the owners conspired to ensure that Watson's contract would be the last of its kind, and that evidence of this conspiracy can be found in part by the fact that quarterbacks Lamar Jackson, Kyler Murray, and Russell Wilson were not offered fully guaranteed deals upon entering free agency after Watson's deal was signed. So the NFL, the arbitration case, the arbiter ruled in favor of the NFL. So the arbiter did not punish the NFL for this, but there is evidence within that ruling that although maybe the owners didn't engage in full-blown collusion, there was certainly open discussion about circumventing the situation.
They colluded. They
Yeah,
colluded.
I know.
Either you did or you didn't.
I'm reading the fine print.
Right. And I am puzzled by the judges, or, is it the arbiter you said?
Yeah, arbiter.
Yeah, the person who is making
tomato
call here. I'm puzzled by the gray area that he leaves there, because it looks pretty clear cut to me. And I referenced the 80s in baseball, where it was a very drawn out court case. It took a couple years to prove, but they nailed the owners. The players did. And you had a very strong players association. The DeMaurice Smith, who I can remember interviewing a few times when he was taking over. Really nice guy. And he tried as hard as he could to lead the players, but he just did not have the clout and the backing of the players to really go at the owners with teeth on this. And I wonder what kind of factor that was when this was all getting hashed out. But I don't see how they didn't nail the owners for this. This looks very clear cut, and this probably needs to be a bigger discussion, even though, like I said last, it's not a real sexy story. It's an important story.
Here's more, Derek, from Defector. The arbitrator found that the NFLMC, the Management Council, did more than dispassionately relay some facts about guaranteed contracts to the owners during this meeting, the meeting in question. Quote, the NFLMC's message was not purely educational and informational, as the NFL contends. It unmistakably encouraged the owners to reduce the trend of increasing player guarantees. And yet, the arbitrator ultimately ruled that NFL owners did not engage in collusion by attending that meeting. Several owners
How could that be?
Several owners successfully made such an argument to the arbitrator. New York Giants owner John Mara explained that the NFLMC merely informs and educates owners so that they can discuss the issues with their GMs or cap managers and make the best decisions for their own franchises. In other words, presence at the meeting did not constitute acquiescence of the NFLMC's message. Decisions are made once owners talk with club personnel and gather more information about their individual situations. In short, attendance at the owner session does not mean that the clubs gave adherence to the scheme.
That is gray area in a big way, don't you think?
Yeah.
I mean, I see the argument. It's like we're all in a room, and Chase comes in here and says, "Guys, I really don't think you. I think you guys should. Let's just pick something arbitrarily. I think you guys should come in and talk baseball for 4 hours every day, and talk about the Braves every day, right? And it would have to be us collectively all having like our own shows. So it would maybe be the 3 shows, the morning show, the midday show, the afternoon show. And I want you guys to do that. And here's why, blah, blah, blah. And we all decide, well, it's what the boss wants us to do. All right, let's do it. But are we saying he just suggested to that? Or he's like, to me, the commissioner's email stamping this and saying, yes, we need to stop this. We need to nip this in the bud. No guaranteed contracts. This is what our whole thing is built on.
He said,
we don't want guaranteed contracts. You guys don't need to do that. Is that a suggestion or is that collusion? I would say when the commissioner is backing it, that's collusion.
He said in this email exchange with the NFL's general counsel, Roger Goodell, that is, quote, agree with raising with a big concern that this will erode a key aspect of our CBA that resisted guaranteed money, except as clubs determined on their own.
Listen, it's everybody knows what it is, and they know what it is, but they will never pin down the NFL in this when it comes to this. They just won't, because we all know that if Chase walked in this room and just planted the seed, we know what he's trying to do. If he's planting the same seed with all 3 shows, we know exactly what's happening, because why? He's the guy that sits in the chair that makes decisions, So if he says to all the shows, I think y'all need to be talking, just come in. I think y'all need to be talking more Atlanta Braves, more baseball, He's not telling us to do it, but he's planting the seed.
And then so we would call the morning. We would we'd walk away from the meeting. We'd talk to the morning show. Hey, what Braves guests do you guys have?
Exactly.
We'll talk Braves. We're colluding. We're working in concert with another club
to talk more baseball.
And in the collective bargaining agreement, it is you cannot do that in collective bargaining. No club can work in concert with another club. That's how the baseball owners got nailed, because the commissioner at the time, Peter Ubroth, came in there and said to the owners, you guys are a bunch of idiots. You're throwing money at players. You're overpaying free agents, and you got to chill. And he was right. There were some teams recklessly spending, which is exactly what the Haslams did with Watson, right? That was a reckless, dumb contract that changed the market and had the players salivating. So, ooh, they just opened up a huge door for us. Let's jump through. And the players were doing it back in the 80s. And so they conspired to make a pact. If Derek Mason's a free agent for the Tigers and I'm the Angels, I can't go in there and offer you a contract. Only the Tigers can re-sign you. And that blew up the free agent market for a couple of years. And it became very obvious by the media, like, why is nobody signing Derek? He's one of the best free agents on the market. Nobody's offering him anything. This was happening with guys like Jack Morris and Andre Dawson and Tim Raines, some of the best players. So it made no sense, and it was obvious what they were doing, and it took a couple years to prove it, but they proved it. This isn't maybe as blatant, but it's pretty clear what they were doing. Once Watson signed the guaranteed deal, there was a pact for nobody else to do that.
It had everything to do with the quarterbacks. It had nothing to do with anybody else, because we see they
were worried that if the quarterbacks get it, then the edge rushers are going to get it. And then the wide receivers are going to get it.
But then again, you can always hold that, but the quarterback is different from everybody else. But even with that, we still see guaranteed contracts. We see rookie contracts that are fully guaranteed. You see some 3-year contracts that are really fully guaranteed. We see contracts that, extend 5-6 years. 3 of the years are fully guaranteed. So it's not about necessarily guaranteeing some. It's about that upper echelon player and guaranteeing $400 million to a quarterback that may play. If he may get injured and only play or at a high level 6 of those 10 years or 5 of those 10 years. But now, like basketball, like baseball, you're stuck with the contract.
Yep, you got to pay him every dime.
You got to pay him every dime. So it had everything to do with the quarterbacks per se and not everybody else, because they know the quarterbacks drive everything. And if they get, like you said, if they get guaranteed contracts, eventually it's going to trickle down. But it was all about the quarterbacks.
The evidence, the quotes that Florio just said. You had the Chargers and the Chargers and the Cardinals saying, "Oh, hey, you're not going to sign. You're not going to give Murray the guaranteed money, right?" No, I'm not doing that. Oh, good. That will help us not do it with our contract. That's conspiring. That is collusion.
615-737-1025. Your thoughts on the apparent collusion? It's most likely collusion. It definitely is collusion. But the arbitrator said it wasn't collusion. But whatever. 615-737-1025. There are some more interesting details about this that we'll get into, as well as your reaction. Coming up next, get out of the summer heat for craft brews, food, games, and entertainment at the 2025 Nashville Predators Craft Beer Festival this Saturday at Bridgestone Arena. For more details, visit thegamenashville.com/events. D. Mace, Vingan, and Donick, 1025, 1063, The Game. Billy Donick, Derek Mason, Adam Vingan here. Talking NFL. Do you smell that? I smell collusion.
What is that from?
Yeah.
I smell collusion. Did you ever watch a show on FX called The League?
No.
It was a raunchy comedy about a group of friends in Chicago who are in a fantasy football league, and one of the friends, his name was Ruxin. That was his last name. He was played by Nick Kroll. You may be familiar with Nick Kroll, the comedian. He always thought that the other members of the friend group and in the fantasy football league were conspiring against him. So he would always say, "I smell collusion."
Well, you smell it now.
So actually, you know what I was thinking, and I mentioned this to you guys during the break. My first thought goes to that scene from The Wire, and I'll have to clean it up, where Stringer Bell says, "Are you taking notes on a criminal conspiracy?" Because that's how I feel like this whole situation has been playing out. So there was a slideshow, I guess, a presentation in this meeting with the NFL Management Council, and there was a talk track corresponding with one of the slides. And it said, quote, "Lastly, if guarantees continue to grow in both amount and number of players, then there's a risk that they become the norm in contracts regardless of player quality. That not only has the potential to hinder roster management, but set a market standard that will be difficult to walk back. Of course, all clubs must make their own decisions."
Right.
But
Well, I'm just throwing
continuing these trends can handcuff a club in the future.
See, that's always been sort of the back and forth since I was in the league and a player rep. It has always been, well, if you guarantee contracts, to everybody, then you're gonna have a guy that one quits on you and he ain't gonna want to play because he got the guaranteed money, or a guy's just gonna be not a good player, and then you're gonna have to hold on to that contract. And that's in every sport. It happens. Things like that happen. What you're doing is betting on a guy that either has shown the ability to play the game at a high level and be consistent, or you believe will be that moving forward. So you're giving him a contract based on that, whether it's guaranteed or not. And the guy can still get that $100 million contract and it not be fully guaranteed. And he still can do all these things that they're scared that a guy with a fully guaranteed contract is going to do. I guarantee you, had you offered Lamar Jackson, had you given Lamar Jackson, Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, any one of these top level guys, you gave them fully guaranteed contracts, they will continue to play the way they had been playing. Why? Because they operate different. They don't operate solely on money. Now, listen, you're going to have some guys and girls that get the bag and all of a sudden they say, "I'm good." But I think more times than not, you're going to have guys that get the bag and still want to compete at a high level. So when they say, well, we're scared guys are going to get the money and quit, whether it's fully guaranteed or not, you're going to have guys that do that, and you're going to have guys that don't do it. I lean toward the side of guys not doing it. Why? Because guys, there's pride involved. Again, you're going to have some guys that does that, you get the money, and then all of a sudden come up with mysterious injuries.
But isn't it much more the injury risk is what?
It's the injury risk.
And they have
injury risk. They have basketball.
The hammer. They have the power. Mm-hmm. They don't want to give up the power, because once you give it up, you don't get it back. And
they see what's happening in basketball. They see what's happening in baseball. As far as
hockey, hockey's got a lot of injury risk, and the players have guaranteed contracts.
So when you have a guaranteed contract, it's not much. And again, I always try to see both sides of the coin. So a guy that was a former player, I still understand the business part of it. Playing a game that's so physical that if I do give you, let's say this, it's easier for me to sort of lean and say, I can give the quarterbacks fully guaranteed contracts. Why? Because we protect the quarterbacks at all costs. But to say I'm gonna give a wide receiver, I'm gonna give a running back, then that's where the problem occurs, right? Because those guys are more susceptible to being injured.
And I would say that a lot of teams, philosophically, nobody has forced them to do that. Mm-hmm. But you should have the right, if you want to, as an individual club, if you want to sign everybody in your team to a guaranteed contract,
That'd
That's
be
your
foolish,
right.
but
It's not smart.
exactly.
And the rest of your peers would say, what is he doing? What is Willie doing signing all these guaranteed contracts? Now we got to do it, right?
Mhm.
That's how it works. But that's what you have to try to keep is the honesty of above board. Each team does have their own. You cannot conspire together to make philosophical things as a group that we're not giving guaranteed contracts out. That's what happened here, I think.
Mike Florio,
It's my take anyway.
in one of his reports, said that what this ruling shows, and what's the what's the word I'm looking for here? Forget it. The point is brain fart there. The point is Florio said that this shows that NFL ownership meetings are really collusion meetings, because what this NFL Management Council does, and I've never heard of the NFL Management Council until yesterday when I was reading the story, what it sounds like is that it makes it possible for these owners to get in a room together and listen to a presentation that might as well have been titled, "Please start colluding, everybody," and not expose themselves to any legal trouble. Just because Robert Kraft didn't stand up in this meeting and say, "We can never do the Deshaun Watson thing again." That was a huge mistake.
Well, let's boil it down to one specific thing that happened right in the aftermath of this is the standoff between Lamar Jackson and the Ravens, right? So do you believe, you know the Ravens organization as well as anybody. Do you think, had it not been for these meetings, that the Ravens would have ended up guaranteeing Lamar Jackson's contract? Or do you think they would have held the line on their own without the influence of the NFL Management Council?
It's tough to say from this standpoint because the Ravens, they do take care of their players. I will say that. But also they are very smart when it comes to contract negotiations and how they set up contracts and how they manage to keep their team, kind of like Pittsburgh, how they manage to keep their team always competitive. A lot of that has to do with signing a right veteran free agent to the right amount of money, or signing your guy who you developed to the right amount of money. So they've always, at least since I've known this franchise, they've always been good at that. So I think, God, it's hard because they were transitioning from GMs. They were transitioning from Ozzie, I believe, that year to DeCosta.
But it's really the owner, right?
Yeah, it's really the
probably
owner.
saying, "Look, we had this meeting.
Bisciotti, I think, would have given him.
Let's give Lamar the money." Like he could have done that, but I wonder if in his mind was like, "Man, I will get absolutely barbecued by the rest of my owners if we do this." But it should be his decision, right?
I think he
apart
would
from
have
everything else.
I think if
Lamar Jackson is a special player.
Exactly. Had that not happened, obviously it did, and you can call it whatever you want to call it. It was collusion.
It's documented.
I think they would have been closer to giving him eventually a guaranteed contract, maybe less years, but guaranteed contract. Then, somebody saying, "Well, y'all, let's get together," and I'm just going to throw that out there. Now makes you think like, okay, as much as I want to give Lamar this guaranteed contract, I got to think about the other 31 owners in this league and what this can potentially do outside of what Haslam already did. I don't want to possibly compound that. But these owners understand that I don't have to guarantee your contract. Your contract is going to be guaranteed by your play as a quarterback. There's no position where they sign you to a 7-year deal and you're not going to get your money. There's no other position like that except the quarterback. Look at Patrick Mahomes. He signed a 10-year deal, $500 million. He's going to get all that money. He's going to get it all. And they keep redoing the contract. So he's going to get it. So in their minds is that
they kind of need a quarterback to push the envelope and say, "I'm not signing until you give me the guarantee."
But in their mind,
that could do it. That could break the dam.
In their mind, they figure the Lamar Jacksons, the Josh Allens, the Joe Burrows, the Patrick Mahomes, the Herberts. I will sign you to a 5-year deal for $200 million. You're gonna get it. I don't have to guarantee you anything. You're gonna get it. But that's the only position that really has that. Because they know, listen, you're going to play for me for the next 10, 12 years. So if I give you a 5-year deal, okay, forget it. I got to pay you anyway. So it's essentially it's guaranteed, but it's not guaranteed.
615-737-1025. We will continue to take your thoughts on this. But coming up next, we'll get back into the Predators. We had a spicy conversation to start the show. We will revisit that coming up next as the NHL draft approaches 2 days away. First round of the NHL draft. Willie Donnick, Derek Mason, Adam Vingan, 1025-1063, The Game. D. Mace Fingan and Donick 1025, 1063 The Game. Broadcasting from the Busy Bee Plumbing, Heating, and Air Conditioning Game Nashville Studios, home of the $99 yearly Beehive membership where the buzz is always about great service. And we are presented by Bet365. Whatever the moment, it's never ordinary at Bet365. Willie Donick, Derek Mason, Adam Vingan here with you. The NHL draft is upon us. First round on Friday. We will have our own draft show live from Bridgestone Arena, if I'm not mistaken, co-hosted by Robbie Stanley and Max Hers. I believe Willie Donick will stop by, and Hal Gill is going to stop by, and Lindsey Rowley is going to stop by, and Willie and I will do a special edition of Preds Insiders tomorrow as well. So a lot of hockey coverage.
A bunch of stop buyers.
And a bunch of stop buyers.
What are they buying?
See, a stop buyer. Yesterday we did that exercise about pick a word for the Titans offseason. I said no 2 words with a hyphen. Stop buyers.
We didn't have any violations yesterday.
Exactly.
did not.
We didn't have any.
So you're not really in trouble because I didn't tell you couldn't do that for this. But that stop buyers is absolutely a word that would have been banned on that exercise. But we got off to a spicy start, I would say, because I just had to poke at Jared a little bit. After Barry Trotz kind of sort of broke his heart yesterday, because Trotz talked about wanting to win next season, looking toward the future as well. Jared has been adamant that Predators fans, and he is a Predators fan, should not judge Barry Trotz until at least 2028, when some of these prospects have developed in their early 20s, and hopefully for the Predators making meaningful contributions. But Jared changed his tune yesterday and said, now we can judge Barry Trotz on what happens this coming season. And the three of us, we got into a bit of an argument. Willie, you told me in the previous hour during a break that you have been compiling a list of something. And I want you to dig into this list a little bit.
Okay, because I think the general discussion we're having here, which is a good discussion, is can you have two plans going on at the same time, a short-term plan and a long-term plan? And does one get in the way of the other? My argument is that Barry Trotz's short-term plan of trying to bounce back with the veteran nucleus that he has does not interfere with the long-term track, which Jared has pointed out, that really there's a lot riding for, and I would lean this way. I do think Barry Trotz, the reckoning will happen around 2028, 29, when we see what this cluster of prospects they've been building for the last couple of years, which it's a painstakingly slow process. But by 28, 29, you should really see what you've got. To me, these are two plans that can be executed at the same time without interfering with one another. And if anybody can give me an example of where one is interfering with the other, then I would like to know, because I don't see it with what I'm doing. But if you're arguing that they should not try to win this year and that they're in limbo or all these things and they got these 30-somethings, yes, they do have 30-somethings. But at least I'm giving you optimism and hope that if it falls right, I think they could look something closer than to the team that they had 2 years ago. They're not that far removed from that. It went about as bad as it could go last year, and they may fall short of the playoffs, but they've got a chance to do something. I made a list of 10 current teams, and I think we could have a discussion about 3 or 4 other teams that are in the somewhere along this spectrum of teams that basically decided to break it down and say, you know what, we're rebuilding. We're going that route. We want high draft picks, and that's how we're going to get a Stanley Cup team. We're going to break it down and tank. Okay? These are the teams I've got. And so ask yourself if you want Barry Trotz to do this, because that's your choice. Chicago, they've made the playoffs once in the last 8 years, and it was an asterisk because it was in the bubble. They would not have made the playoffs, but they were in the weird format they did in the bubble. They got in there.
The last time they made the real playoffs was when they were swept by the Predators in 2017.
They have not won a playoff series in 10 years. 10 years. So are they going to make the playoffs this year?
No.
It would be a huge
A miracle.
if they made the playoffs this year. So we're talking about a decade of stinking.
Stinky, 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 as Derek Mason would say.
Because take a look. They haven't been close to making the playoffs.
No.
Chicago is the headliner. Columbus has now gone 5 years without a playoff appearance.
Just missed this past season.
And they look like they could be on the verge of starting to have some pretty good stuff. Buffalo, 14 years. Need we say any more about Buffalo? 14 years without making the playoffs.
Longest drought in NHL history without a playoff
They've had to
appearance.
reboot their rebuild 2 or 3 times within that, right? Detroit has now gone 9 straight years without making the playoffs. Ottawa made the playoffs for the first time in 8 years. They barely made it. They lost in the first round. They have a nucleus that could be pretty good. They might be on the verge, but it took 8 years. 8. So that if you have a child who's 10 and in 5th grade, this means when he's going to college, that's the next time your team is going to make the playoffs. Okay?
Well, how many years? 8?
8 years. That's a long rebuild. Are you prepared to do that? You're going to keep your season tickets for 8 years? Or would you rather have a chance with the 30-somethings and some flexibility? This is where we get into the nuance of what they're trying to do here. And I'm not even halfway through the list. We got Anaheim, 7 years. Anaheim's a pretty good team. They've won Stanley Cups. They've been to Stanley Cup Finals. They were a really, really good team. The Predators beat them 3 different dogfights in the playoffs.
Those were some fabulous
Great
series.
hockey.
Fabulous series.
They've gone 7 years without making the playoffs. Do they have a shot at making the playoffs this year? Maybe. They're trying to.
They're a bubble team, I would
They're
say.
probably a bubble team, but it's taken 7 years. San Jose is going on 6 years. 6 years straight of not making the playoffs. Are they making the playoffs this year?
Who is that?
San Jose Sharks?
No.
Not even close. It's going to take 2, 3, 4 more years. We're talking about a decade of not making the playoffs.
So, Willie,
Before they really see the fruits. And they've got some good young players. Skarov's in there. They've got high first-round picks.
Celebrini.
Yeah.
They'll have the second
realistically,
overall pick.
Realistically, it's going to be tough for them to win anytime soon.
okay, so here is sort of the dilemma because listen, those names you threw out.
I could go on, but
yeah.
you get the point.
I mean, no one wants to be sitting in a position as a fan base and waiting 8, 9, 10 years for your
So
team
we're
to
talking
finally
about a
develop.
third of the league falls into this category. About a third. So do you want to? Everybody makes fun of the mushy middle, but do you want to really be in that third of the league where you're like, hey, don't worry, man, we're going to get it because we've got Macklin Celebrini, we've got Connor Bedard. That's great, but do you want to take that long to even make the playoffs? I'm not saying contend for a championship. I'm saying make the playoffs.
But what happens when or if you didn't went down this road? And I'm not saying that you're boxed in from a standpoint of letting these guys or blocking anyone from developing because they're going to develop. And I don't think your roster, you're that top heavy where you can't sort of bring people up as they're developing. I think you still can. But with that being said, what is it that they do moving forward? Can they both, because that's what they're trying to do, can they both prepare this team for now to win now, but also look toward the future? Because again, the fan base may not want to hold on that long.
Right.
Then what if it doesn't work again this year? Then what do you do?
Well, you haven't jeopardized what is a very slow process of building a prospect pool. That's why Jared is right by saying there is a lot riding on this prospect pool of guys like Matthew Wood, Reed Schaefer, David Edstrom, Joachim Kemmel. Those guys are all young. Yegor Surin, who decided to stay one more year in Russia before he comes over. He's 19 years old, but he's a guy that down the road they need. And they're not all going to hit, but you need a couple of big hits from that nucleus. There's a group of guys that probably aren't going to make a huge impact this year that you hope will start. Tanner Molendijk would be in this group as well. They're not quite ready. So they're not being blocked by anybody on the roster for this year's team. And as I pointed out in the first hour, Barry Trotz has really big flexibility after this year because here are the players that are in the last year of their contract. Michael Bunting, Eric Haula, who they just picked up, Colton Sissons, Cole Smith, Michael McCarron. These are all the veteran players. Jeremy Lozon. Justin Barron's a younger player who's going to be restricted after this year. He's super cheap. So that's a large group of guys that you want to keep one or two, keep one or two. You want to trade one or two, trade one or two. Want to just let a couple walk, let a couple walk. But that could give you more space to bring up who the players that are ready to come up, that they are banking on for that big 28-29 season.
I will speak to the other side because there is a word that you used in there, and I think your points are all well taken. They are certainly valid. There is a word that you used in there, and I'm going to introduce another word.
Okay.
You used the word chance, as in the Predators' chances to compete. And that other word is compete or competitive. So this was ESPN bet, and I know betting odds are not the end all be all. But after
it's a good gauge, though.
After the season ended, ESPN Bet had the Predators. So this was a week ago. It could have changed. Had the Predators at 100-1 odds of winning the Stanley Cup next season. They share the same odds as the Montreal Canadiens, Detroit Red Wings, Boston Bruins. Directly underneath them, Buffalo, Pittsburgh, Anaheim, Seattle, Chicago, and San Jose. So the Predators have among the longest odds, according to ESPN Bet a week ago, to win the Stanley Cup. I talked about this last week when both of you were out and Nick Frazier was sitting in with me. Your definition of the word competitive, I think not yours, Willie, just generally. Your definition of the word competitive, I think, goes a long way in determining how you feel. From what it sounds like, Willie, if your definition of a competitive team is a team that has a chance to make the playoffs, would that be accurate?
Well, I'm echoing what Barry Trotz said.
Okay. I disagree with that
because
definition.
That's what he said.
I personally disagree with that definition. To me, if you are to be considered competitive, and again, this is only me, and I've got some high standards. To be considered competitive in the NHL, I think you have to have a legitimate chance to win the Stanley Cup.
Okay.
I do not think this Predators team, and a lot can change within the next week, I do not think this Predators team this coming season has a legitimate chance to win the Stanley Cup. And therefore, I would be looking to whatever words you want to use, rebuild, retool, whatever. They all sort of mean the same thing. That doesn't mean you tear it all down, but I think that your end goal shouldn't be sneaking into the playoffs and maybe winning around. Because right now, again, a lot can change. This is just my gut feeling as of June 25th at 1:16 p.m. My ceiling for the 2025-2026 Nashville Predators is what you saw from the Predators 2 seasons ago, what you saw from the Predators in the year they were swept by the Colorado Avalanche. They get in, they pose no threat to a better team.
And they didn't have UC Saros in that series, but your point is taken. They were a big underdog in the first round.
So I just think that being in that mushy middle, I know it means you may make playoff appearances, but what does it really get you in the end?
But you're still working towards getting towards a team that can compete. How many teams right now would you put in the category that you're talking about, Adam? Compete for a legitimate chance to win a Stanley Cup? 6, 8?
Florida, obviously. Edmonton. Colorado. Carolina. Dallas. Vegas. Tampa. They're on the
cusp.
Win the whole thing. They're on the cusp.
You really think so?
I still think
a legitimate chance to win the Stanley Cup.
I will never rule out Tampa Bay. We can quibble about it, but it's a small list. It's less than a third of the league, I would say.
So you're saying that 2/3 of the league should be retooling and doing what you just said
in some form or fashion. If you don't have a legitimate chance to win the cup,
but the Predators are doing that. They are retooling. If they have a way of making their team better, quicker, they'll do it. Right? They're not going to just say, let's bring in. I don't know what your definition of what would be the mistake. Like, I get it. Playing just trading your first round pick
Yes.
to get a veteran player.
They haven't done any of that.
That's what I'm talking
The
about.
Predators
So
haven't
that's
done
why
any of
I
that.
go back to they have the 2 lanes. And Barry Trotz is so consistent, beating this into everybody's head that my pathway might meander a little bit here, but my goal of building a team that can win a Stanley Cup is right there. I'm not going to do anything to deter us from doing that. Now, if they trade 3 first-round picks for a 35-year-old to try to win this year, that would be a mistake.
Well,
but they haven't done anything like that.
He's hoping that what he thought last year happens this year, where, all these guys start to playing at a level closer to, the level they were before they got here, which will buy them more time for those guys to develop underneath them. You can't go into this season and say, no, we're not geared to win this year. We're looking more toward 27, 28, 29. Well, what happens is if you're not geared to winning now or trying to win now, those young guys have to be expedited, and then they're not going to be ready. So I get what Barry's trying to do as far as trying to keep this thing at a level where we're winning, but those younger guys are developing. So when they hit,
right,
we'll be fine.
So again, one lane does not interfere with the other. I'll make this last point about the mushy middle and the chance. What is more fun to watch day in and day out
winning
of a season?
Winning hockey.
Let's take the 21. What year was it? 21-22, the year that they lost to the Avalanche.
Yes.
Right? 21-22. That season was a lot of fun. In the regular season, you had great moments. You had Tanner Jeannot scoring 24 goals. And you had, the Biloxi Bowl. And you had fun hockey every night. The Herd. You had UC Soros putting on a show. You had Roman Josi doing his thing. That was fun. That was entertaining. Would you take that even when UC Soros got hurt and you get your clock cleaned in the first round? Or would you take last year? Which was more fun?
Why don't we?
Which was more fun?
Why don't
answer the question? Which is more interesting to cover? You cover teams?
Yes, I did.
Do you think you would have had fun covering last year?
And that was just a rhetorical question. We know the answer.
No, I wouldn't have had
Okay.
more fun. Well, you know what? Sometimes teams.
I throw my hat in the ring and I compete. Either that or, okay, we're going to tank.
Sometimes teams that
cover the Blackhawks for the last few years. Has that been fun?
Hey, sometimes teams that are tire fires are more fun to cover. I'm just telling you.
In a twisted way, because you're twisted. You love chaos. That's
I do. Like, I always mention this. When I lived in Washington, D.C., it's great that the Commanders are a good team now. The then Redskins were so much more fun when they were dysfunctional. That year with Robert Griffin, that was a great regular season, right? And then he tears his knee in the playoff game. Everything goes to crap. And it was more fun in the fallout of all of the things.
But that's why we love sports. There's
Yes.
more heartbreak than triumph in sports. We strive for the triumph.
Yes. 615-737-1025. We'll take your thoughts on this. 615-737-1025. I do have a a 4-pack of tickets, not a pair, a 4-pack of tickets to give away right now. Be caller number 2 at 615-737-1025, I guess, unless you have a Verizon phone. But be caller number 2 at 615-737-1025, and you will win a 4-pack of tickets to the FIFA Club World Cup match at Geodis Park tomorrow night at 8 o'clock. All Halal versus CF Pachuca. That's at 8 o'clock tomorrow at Geodis Park. 615-737-1025. Caller number 2, Willie Donick, Derek Mason, Adam Vingan, 102.5-106.3 The Game.
I want to go back to what you said earlier about, you wanted to see where this roster goes before picking a lane, I think is what you said on the, the path.
I just want to stay on the path, and then if it gives me some more clarity, if it gets back on the rails the way I think it will, then there won't be really any change in plan. It really, like I said, the plan has always been in pen, and the path has been in pencil, and that's the truth. It changes daily. Someone comes with me and gives me a top player for some picks or whatever. I could change the path a little bit, but the plan hasn't changed.
So I mean, I guess and this kind of leads into free agency next week. But are you saying you kind of look at this team as a win now, compete now kind of team?
Well, I think we're still got enough good players that if we go in the right direction, yes. Yeah, last year we didn't, and we weren't part of that, so it was a tough year.
But why does everybody have to? Why does everybody tries to pin him down on win now? Yeah, you'd like to win now. You'd like to, but he's not jeopardizing the end goal. Why is that so hard to grasp?
You know why it is. So
win now means trade all your prospects for veteran players right now. That's what win now means. But everything goes into this year.
If it doesn't happen, then they can say, well, you said that you were in the win now phase. That's what I believe this is about, because I think he has been clear, meaning Barry. He has been clear on the vision of this team and where he wants this team to go. I don't think he's meshed words. I don't think he's tried to throw people off. I think and that's the part we like about Barry, is that he's up front. He's telling you where he's told you when he got hired. And I don't think he's deviated from the message. Now, he may have deviated from, how you go about it, but I think the message is still clear.
And it's hard to look Steven Stamkos and Ryan O'Reilly and Brady Shea in the eye and say, we're not trying to win.
Yeah.
You're trying to win, but you have to work with what you've got, and you have to play the long game, which they have been playing since before Barry Trotz took over. And I will go back to when they did the fire sale, when it was kind of a fire sale, when they were still not completely out of the playoffs. That was a couple years ago when John Hines was still the coach, and they traded Nino Niederreiter, Mikhail Granlund, Tanner Jeannot, and Matthias Ekholm. That was a pretty big fire sale. That was a message of, we are rebuilding. And so they acquired a lot of assets, some of which they haven't even cashed in on. They're about to take a first-round pick for Tanner Jeannot later this week. That hasn't even happened yet.
Still can't believe they got all of that for Tanner Jeannot all of these years later.
So that was before Barry Trotz officially took over. All right. So this is, again, his statement that he keeps going to it is, my end game is the same, right? That's in pen where I want to get. But in the meantime, let's see what we can do with the roster we have.
Let's get to some of our texts at 615-737-1025. One texter says, as much as Willie wants to believe anything could happen in the playoffs, the entire Predators' existence, I guess minus 2017, shows that it's probably not possible. You have to start over somewhere, and you are probably going to suck for a little bit. Don't put the future in jeopardy just because it wasn't fun last year.
Okay, I go back to Chicago. 8 years. One playoff appearance.
One texter
Buffalo,
said,
14 years.
Those Stanley
Detroit,
Cup winning
9
years were sure fun in Chicago.
I'm talking about the last 8 years when they decided to rebuild. And by the way, they stunk for a long time before they had the run. Yeah, they absolutely had a borderline dynasty. I would call it a dynasty from about 2008 to 2015, where they won 3 cups. That was awesome. But we're talking about a decade of suffering, and it's not ending anytime soon, by the way. So keep looking back on those. But let's look at worst case scenario. Okay, worst case scenario for this year. Let's say it doesn't go well, and I will tell you, I'm not sitting here saying the Predators will be predicted to make the playoffs. They're not. They will be a team that is not predicted to make the playoffs by very many people. But they have a puncher's chance to have a competitive year where they get into the playoffs, and you do never know. For a round or two, do I think they're going to win the Stanley Cup this year? No. But let's say it goes bad again. They fire the coach. They're in seller's mode in January. The silver lining is you pick high again. Nothing wrong with that. That still works towards the 28-29 vision. Can you get some good assets for Ryan O'Reilly in a trade? I think probably so. Could you trade Eric Halla, Michael Bunting, Colton Sissons, Michael McCarron? Those are guys that could get you more draft picks, more assets, which will go towards the rebuild. So it could go that way. And Barry Trotz has made no secret of that. But what's wrong with that?
Here's a question for you. And this is not
Because the flaw in my thing is you don't get to pick very high,
this
right?
is not, and along those lines,
Yeah.
this is a question for you, and it's not meant to be like a gotcha. Like I am curious. You're looking at the latest Stanley Cup champions. How many recent Stanley Cup champions did not suffer through some terrible years at some point? The Panthers certainly did.
Decades.
The Golden Knights did not. The Golden Knights won.
They're their own thing.
They were ultra aggressive and making trades.
Right.
They did not have
They're in
to
their own
suffer.
category because of how they came into the league.
Yes. The Avalanche, they had to suffer. The Lightning, they had to suffer.
True.
The Blues didn't really have to. The Blues didn't really suffer. They were a bubble team for a little bit, and they ultimately made a great run from worst to first. We
Fair.
all know that. The Capitals, they had to suck for a little while. The Penguins,
When did the Capitals really?
it was in the lead up to the Ovechkin. It was in the lead up to.
But that was. I mean, they built for a long time. They were good with Ovechkin. For
Okay,
a long
so
time.
we can put Ovechkin.
But yeah,
we
but
can-
I get your point. They had to be so bad that they had
a lot
the
of
first
these
pick.
teams had to be bad enough
Sure.
to acquire a top end talent at or near the top of the
Well,
draft.
and so you're preaching to the Chicago, Columbus, Buffalo, Detroit, Ottawa, Anaheim, San Jose. They've gone down this road
Mm-hmm.
because that's the thinking. But I'm just saying, if you want to go with that, you can. But I just listed the number of years of rough coverage.
Right. If
Rough hockey.
there is some.
And couldn't this market? Is this a market that you would be okay doing that?
That is
Chicago,
that
the
is a good
Blackhawks are going to
question.
be there, whether they stink for another 10 years. They're going to be there. In this market, could you go 7 years in a rebuild? Even if I said you're going to pick in the top 10. Basically, this is Anaheim. Anaheim has had some trouble keeping their fans, right? And this is a franchise that's won a Stanley Cup. They've had a lot of really good teams. They're going now 7 straight years without a playoff thing. And it's a huge city. They're kind of a secondary part in Southern California. What about Nashville? Could you go through 7 years of that? What would
It's
the
a
fan
good question
What would the
because
fan base
the
look like?
Predators, the longest time they've ever gone without making the playoffs is 5 seasons. The first 5 seasons.
Right. So
Oh,
since
that's different
since they
yeah.
started making the playoffs,
Yes.
have they gone more than 2? I don't know.
They
if
have not gone more than 2 years without making the playoffs.
And that's why my question initially was
2 years is the most.
13 and 14. That's it.
does the fan base understand?
They missed 2 of the past 3 years.
Yeah,
But
does the fan base truly understand, that, everybody's saying, well, it takes 6. Do you really understand? Are you willing to sit in it for 6, 7
Right.
years? Detroit, they were able to sit in it, and they're still sitting in it somewhat, but because they won cups.
That's all I'm saying is there a middle ground, a Dallas type of thing that we've talked about? Washington, more recently, you pointed them out, where you're trying to mix the two. Barry Trotz has been very open book Barry, and he was about as open as he could be yesterday, even for him. Like he was specifically talking about guys, and David Poyle would never tell you what he thought 5th pick, but he talked openly about yesterday. He believes philosophically the best way to develop young players is to put veteran players alongside those young players. And that helps them grow, helps teach them how to win, helps them play the right way. And the guys that are critical in this right now that will be playing a lot for this team, the young players, Svechkov, 1st-round pick, LaRue, 1st-round pick, Evangelista, who's at a big crossroads in his career, Justin Barron. Those would be, and I would throw Adam Wilsby in there. I don't know what they're going to do on deep. Barry had some pretty interesting things to say about the defense yesterday. It does sound like they really want to make a splash and find one guy who can stabilize the D. But those guys I mentioned are going to be there pretty much night in and night. They're going to have an opportunity to play. every night. They need one of those guys to really pop. Svechkov would be the ideal guy, right? Still very young, thrown to the wolves a little bit last year, playing alongside some veterans. He mentioned Haula as a guy that could maybe help a guy like Svechkov. Can you get him to, as Barry Trotz said himself, can I get him into that 2C role someday soon? That would be a huge victory.
I want to ask Derek this question before we get to Jared on the other side. We had one texter earlier who said, I feel like the Predators are where the Titans were a year or two ago. Bad drafting for the past 5 years with no good young players and trying to build a team through free agency is a recipe for years of being terrible. Now, as you said, Derek, it's apples to oranges comparing the timeline for NFL drafted players and NHL drafted players. But where do you stand on that texter's point?
I mean, listen, because in the NFL, you are expected to play right now. So I can see the fruits of that individual right now, and he can help my team today. And in hockey, obviously, it's different. When you draft a guy today, he ain't playing for you more than likely until, next week, which in theory is like 5 years, 6 years on, from that standpoint. So, and that's why the question is, do we all really understand? Not you two, because I know you two do. And I know there are a lot of, Predator fans that understand that too. But I think there is a group that don't quite understand that 7 years, do you really want to wait 7 years for your team to now be in contention to consistently not just be in the playoffs, but to be a Stanley Cup contending team? If you're willing to wait 7 years, then okay. 5, 6, 7 years, then okay. What Barry is doing, he's stuck to it. But if you're not willing to wait that long, then you're hoping this team that they have right now with the additions that they added last year, they pop this year. Because if they pop, it helps with that, I think, ultimately, that 7-year sort of cutoff we have as far as those guys developing and able to help your ball club. If those guys that they brought in last year don't hit again, then now I got to expedite that young talent, which it messes everything up.
Right. That was the problem with last year. The veterans all had bad years, and the young players that were starting to scratch the surface, none of them popped. So you put all that together with a team that really didn't have a lot of good chemistry. They had all kinds of things go wrong, and you had a team that has the 5th overall pick.
Before we go, Jeff texted in, and I feel like we've been kind of ganging up on Willie.
No, I want to hear it, honestly.
No, but here's a texter that shares your viewpoint. Jeff says, Barry believes in the correction, which is the opposite of last year's results, and so do I. The average should equal a bubble team or better, and Barry showed how to load up at the trade deadline the year before. It's hope for sure, but that's better than a decade of terrible hockey. So I just wanted to make sure that we knew that there was someone on your side.
And I concede that the flaw in my philosophy, and maybe Barry Trotz's, is that let's say even you get into the playoffs and you lose in the first round and you end up picking 15th or 16th or 17th, then does that really get you closer? You need to be fortunate, or you need to really make it happen this year, et cetera, when you do have a 5th pick. But my flaw is if you're trying to win and still not mortgaging the future, without the high-end first-round pick in the equation somewhere, it is hard to get the type of top center elite talent you're looking for.
615-737-1025. All right. It's time to bring in a heartbroken, a despondent Jared Stillman. Again, I saw his heartbreak in real time yesterday, just like Ralph Wiggum.
Did you go frame by frame?
I haven't done that yet. But David James, you're really good at finding Jared Stillman reaction stills.
I can definitely find it.
I need you to find it. 615-737-1025. Willie Donick, Derek Mason. At 102.5, 106.3 The Game.
Are you looking at this saying, hey, you know, our top priority is to put a team out there this year to go compete? Or is your priority, hey, let's build this thing up in the future?
Well, I can answer that pretty easily. My priority is right now. I want to get us back into a position where we're fighting for a playoff spot. That last year we didn't get in that position. I feel if we get off to a good start, we'll be in that position. If we get to the position where we get in the playoffs, I think we can add some things because we have lots of assets. We got kids coming, and we got draft choices, all that. So I'll continue to do that. But my priorities now, with the eyes to the future, that's not anything I haven't said in the past. But I want to get the winning feeling again back here in this organization. Last year was a tough year, so I want to get that joy back. That's priority number one.
And that was the second when Jared Stillman's heart ripped in half because what he thought was the priority wasn't the priority. At least that's how he interpreted it from Barry Trotz. And now we join Jared Stillman ahead of Stillman and Company. Jared, now that you had about a day to process this all, how are you feeling today?
Well, I got to say, that's a really loaded question about how I'm feeling. I think Barry Trotz put himself on the clock yesterday by saying that his emphasis is on this, his focus is on this upcoming season. And I heard the opening of the DVD program. So you're asking how I feel. I have a bone to pick with Willie, Barry Trotz said it. It's about this upcoming season. And I gave him
because you tried to trap him in that.
I didn't try to trap him for nothing. I was trying to get him out of this ambiguity circle of talking out of both sides of his mouth that Adam has been talking about for the last year. Okay. And I've had enough of the talking out of both sides of the mouth too. So I said, okay, be honest with the people. Be honest with the fans. Level with them. Is the goal right now the 2026 playoffs, or is the goal the 2028, 2029 playoffs? And it can't be both.
Why? Give me an example of where one affects the other.
Let's use the 5th overall pick. Let's say that James Higgins has told you, hey, I'm going to go back to BC. So if you are thinking of drafting me number 5 overall, I will not be on your team next year until April at the earliest. And so if you're thinking about putting me on the second line next year next to Steven Stamkos, don't do it because I'm going to go back to BC.
Right. Do you think they're counting on the 5th pick?
If I have to win next year, then I'm not taking that guy. If I have to win or I'm going to get fired, I'm not taking that guy. I'm taking somebody that can be on the team.
How many 5th overall picks have played in the league more than 10 games in the last 25 years? 4. Okay. Do you think
Phil Kessel one of them?
Yes, he was.
And he had 29 points. Do you think that they're counting on the 5th overall pick to get him over the hump or not over the hump this year?
Well, if again your focus was on this upcoming season,
you try to trap him into words. He's been clear.
It's not a trap. He has not been clear. Adam, has he been clear?
Yes, he's been crystal clear. Crystal clear. He says the same thing every time.
I would have to go back and listen to every single segment.
Adam, you can't do it.
Come on.
You can't stand up to these two.
Okay, let me ask another question, Jared. If he says, my priority is 2028, 2029, I asked Derek, a former player, if you're sitting in the locker room, what's your reaction to that? If you're Steven Stamkos, if you're Ryan O'Reilly, and your GM says that, what's your reaction?
Trade me.
Well, didn't Barry Trotz say
my reaction?
So you say how can you not say
he said
that you're trying to win
year.
this year? You have to say that.
He said on the program last year when I asked him probably around the election or Thanksgiving or something, November-ish. And I said to him, I go, what if it doesn't get better? And he said, then I'm going to start with our rebuild process. And everybody, when they heard that, it was alarm bells going off. And Adam, you were the chief among them, saying you don't rebuild after signing Steven Stamkos, Jonathan Marchessault, Brady Shea. Did you not say that, Adam?
Yes. That's sort of the argument that you and I had about the types of players that they signed in free agency, where I would say if you're buying time, you sign Nick Foligno. You don't sign Steven Stamkos.
It didn't get better around Christmas. And to Barry Trotz's credit, there were changes. Goodbye to Alexander Carrier. He's taking a risk on a flyer on Justin Barron to see if he's any good. He calls up Zachary LaRue. He calls up Fedor Svechkov. He's going to call up more guys. Again, at that point, you said, okay, well, I'm going to go to the rebuild. Well, if you're going to the rebuild, then go to the rebuild. But don't do this going to the rebuild for the rest of last season and now going back to trying to win this season. That's not how it works. You cannot have it both ways, Willie. You cannot have it both ways.
Give me another example where his vision, which he made very clear to you, it is extremely important. You're right to hit the timeline that you did, 28, 29. That's a huge year because then we're talking about where is Matthew Wood? Where's Yegor Surin? Guys who are 17, 18, 19, 20 years old right now. Schaefer, Edstrom, Kimmel, these guys that they've been building, the guys they're about to draft. In another 3 years, that is an incredibly big reckoning for Barry Trotz. But again, tell me where what they're trying to do this year interferes with that group.
So Joe
who are they blocking?
So Joe Retro thinks if they don't make the playoffs this year, that Trotz should be fired. And I don't believe that, or at least I didn't believe that before yesterday, because I'm saying, hey, it's about 28.
I'm not asking you that. I'm asking you tell me an example of where the plan of trying to win this year blocks your thing of the 28-29 Predators. Who is being blocked?
I'll use the example of the fork in the road here and why 26 versus 28 is totally different. Rasmus Anderson is on the trading block, a right shot.
And I heard you ask him. I heard you ask Barry. That was a really good question.
If you are committed to winning next year, you're probably calling Calgary today and offering 23 or 26 in order to get Rasmus Anderson. And then you're signing Rasmus Anderson to an 8-year, $8 million contract.
Right. I think that's very unlikely that they would
Well,
trade
why
for
is
him
that unlikely? Aren't we trying to win next year? So one has to take priority over the other.
You're trying to win. Well, again, you can't say that you're putting all your eggs into this year's basket. And you also can't say that I only care about what happens 3 years from now. You're trying to thread the needle, and he's made it clear that he's trying to thread the needle. You don't have to do both. I keep asking you what interferes with it. Now, that's a really good question.
It doesn't
now,
work.
Rasmus Anderson at 28, 29 is different than the guy that you have never heard of, Noah Dobson, right? Somebody who's more like 23, 24, 25. That to me is what you're trying to hit. Is there a deal where you can trade some future assets for a guy that can be around and be in his prime in 28, 29? That I think is what he's looking for, where you're trying to serve both without mortgaging the future and putting all your eggs in this season, which is an extreme take that you're trying to pin him down only this year. He has to think about both. That's a GM's job. But short-term and long-term.
But at some point, isn't there a push comes to shove moment when you're making a decision?
It depends on how the first 3 months of the seasons go, right? If they're January 1st this year and they're not very good, they can pivot, and they have a lot of guys in the last year of their contract that they can trade and get good assets for.
No more pivoting. And all the guys that are in the last year of their contracts are all third line,
Ryan O'Reilly.
Pair. He's the one guy who might matter, but the core of this team, Forsberg, Yossi, Marchessault, Stamkos, Saros, they ain't going anywhere. And they're locked into those. And again, every team
has those guys. Every team has those guys.
Say, well, McCarron, they can get rid of him. McCarron doesn't make a difference one way or another. It's not as if trading Michael McCarron is going to change the franchise's course for the near future. It's just not going to happen.
Right, but it opens up the space for a younger player at that point. But if Michael McCarron has the season he had 2 years ago, he is making a positive impact. And that would go for a lot of these guys who are in the last year of their contract.
And quickly, one other thing you have to keep in mind as well is when you're talking about the younger players they have right now in their system, and the 5th overall pick in 48 hours. You talked to Scott Wheeler. We talked to him earlier. The Predators have a lot of guys in the system that he has, some positive feelings about. But none of them right now seem to project to be the guy that can take this team to the next level.
Well, we'll just trade Michael McCarron and Cole Cousins.
All right. I can only imagine we're going to have a spicy edition of Stillman and Company. I can't wait. Coming up in a few minutes. That'll do it for us. See you tomorrow.
Well, hold on. I want to tease the beginning of my show first.
Sure.
My dad has gotten on my ass about something. So we're going to start off on
Barry Stillman.
Finally.
Oh, Barry.
Getting on you.
All right.
Barry Trotz on Tuesday.
Yeah.
Barry Stillman on Wednesday.
Yes, it's all about the Berries. We'll see you tomorrow at 11 o'clock.
Be love on your people. Have a safe, blessed, wonderful Wednesday. Peace.